"Excuse me, you're in my space?" The words cut through the quiet luxury of the JFK Centurion Lounge like a slap no one expected. Sharp, clear, certain. Victoria Ashford didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the entire seating area to hear her cream silk blouse catching the afternoon light as she stood with one hand on her designer handbag, the other gesturing at the chair beside her with perfectly manicured nails. David Monroe looked up from his book. Slow, measured. His dark eyes met hers without surprise, without anger. He'd seen this before. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This section." Victoria said, her tone clipped professional, like she was explaining basic math to a child. "It's for platinum members and above. You need to sit in the general area." David glanced at the identical leather chairs surrounding them. No signs, no ropes, no markers dividing one space from another. "This is the general area," he said. Victoria's jaw tightened. She shifted her weight, Louboutin heels clicking against marble with a sound that demanded attention. "I don't think you understand how this works," she said. Around them, conversation died. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A woman paused mid-sip of champagne. A gate agent behind the counter looked up, sensing trouble before it fully arrived. David closed his book slowly, marking the page with his finger. "I understand perfectly," he said. What Victoria Ashford didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she stood there in her $1,000 outfit radiating confidence and contempt, was that in exactly 90 minutes the man she was trying to remove would shut down the entire airline ground, every plane in the fleet, and erase everything she thought made her untouchable. "Before we get into how this happened, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. And if this opening already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. You'll want to see how this plays out. Now, let's rewind to 30 minutes before this moment to understand exactly how we got here." Victoria had arrived at the lounge 45 minutes earlier, dragging her Gucci carry-on behind her like a statement of worth. 38 years old, investment banking executive at Whitfield Investments, she'd flown first class so many times she'd stopped counting. The lounge wasn't just a place to wait. It was a space she owned by right of purchase, by accumulation of miles, by the simple fact that she could afford to be there. She'd chosen a seat by the window, arranged her belongings with territorial precision, and opened her laptop to review the London presentation one more time. $5 million deal. Her deal. The promotion she'd been chasing for 3 years hung on this pitch. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant Brennan wants the numbers by tonight. Victoria's fingers flew across the keyboard, stress tightening her shoulders. She flagged down a server without looking up. "Champagne," she said. "Dom Perignon, if you have it." The server, young careful, holding herself small in the way service workers do around people who treat them like furniture, nodded quickly. "Right away, ma'am. And make it quick," Victoria added. "I have a flight to catch." The champagne arrived in a crystal flute. Victoria took a sip without thanking the server eyes never leaving her screen. The numbers needed to be perfect. The deck needed to be flawless. She couldn't afford mistakes. That's when David Monroe walked into the lounge. He moved quietly, a black backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. White sneakers, clean but worn. No jewelry, no watch. Nothing that screamed wealth or status. He looked like someone who'd wandered in from economy by mistake. Victoria noticed him immediately. Not because he was loud or disruptive, but because he didn't fit. Not in her mental catalog of who belonged in spaces like this. David showed his boarding pass to the desk attendant, who smiled warmly and gestured toward the seating area. He found an empty chair 3 rows from Victoria, set down his backpack, and pulled out a hardcover book. No laptop, no phone out, just a book and noise-canceling headphones resting around his neck. Victoria watched him settle in, her eyes narrowing slightly. She returned to her work, but found her attention drifting. Back to him, to the way he sat, the way he occupied space without apology. 10 minutes passed. 15. Victoria's presentation wasn't coming together. The numbers felt off. Her stress mounted, and somewhere in that mounting pressure his presence became an irritant. A wrongness she couldn't name but could feel. She stood abruptly, gathering her things, walked directly to the seat beside him. "Excuse me, you're in my space." And here we were, full circle. David looked at her now, still calm, still measured. He removed his headphones and set them carefully in his lap. "I'm not in your space," he said. "I'm in a public lounge seating area." "This section is for premium members," Victoria insisted. "I'm a premium member," David said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and showed her his Skybridge Platinum Elite status. Digital card, clear as day. Victoria stared at the screen, then at him. Something in her chest tightened, not embarrassment exactly, something sharper. The dissonance between what she expected and what she was seeing. "That doesn't look right," she said. David's expression didn't change. "It's valid. You can check with the desk." "I will," Victoria said. She walked to the front desk, heels clicking with purpose. The attendant looked up with practiced patience. "Hi, I'm Victoria Ashford. I fly First International at least twice a month." She gestured subtly toward David. "That man back there is making me uncomfortable. He's sitting in the premium section, and I don't believe his status qualifies him." The attendant, barely 25, nervous under Victoria's gaze, glanced past her toward David. "Ma'am, that area isn't restricted to any particular membership level. It's general lounge seating." "I understand that," Victoria said, voice tight. "But I'm paying for a certain environment, and his presence is disrupting that environment." "Ma'am, if he has valid lounge access..." "Call your supervisor." Victoria interrupted. "Please." At a nearby table, Sarah Bennett pulled out her phone. 28 travel blogger, 200,000 Instagram followers, she'd learned to recognize moments before they became stories. She aimed her camera, discreetly hit record. "Hey everyone, Sarah, here from the Centurion Lounge at JFK, she whispered to the lens. "And I'm watching something really uncomfortable happen right now." The supervisor arrived within minutes. Jennifer Walsh, 33 gate supervisor, tablet in hand, expression already set to corporate neutral. She approached David first, not Victoria. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Jennifer Walsh, the supervisor on duty. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," David said simply. Jennifer turned to Victoria. "Ms. Ashford, I understand there's been a concern." "Yes?" Victoria said, modulating her voice to sound reasonable. "I've been a loyal customer for years. I expect a certain standard when I fly, and I don't feel comfortable with the current seating arrangement." Jennifer glanced between them. "Ma'am, this gentleman has appropriate lounge access. He's flying first class today. He has every right to be here." "That's not the point," Victoria said. "Then what is the point?" David asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. 3 tables away. Michael Torres, 52, retired Air Force build. That still suggested morning PT, set down his coffee and watched with narrowed eyes. He'd seen enough in 20 years of service to recognize what was happening. He pulled out his phone, typed a quick text to his wife. "You're not going to believe what I'm watching right now." The PA system crackled overhead. "Skybridge Airlines Flight 447 to London Heathrow will begin boarding in 15 minutes. First class and premium passengers may proceed to gate B27. David tucked his book into his backpack and shouldered it with easy motion. "Have a good flight," he said to no one in particular. He walked toward the gate, headphones now covering his ears. Victoria watched him go, jaw tight, something unresolved burning in her chest. She grabbed her Gucci carry-on, checked her reflection in a nearby window. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, and followed at a distance. Sarah Bennett, still filming, whispered into her phone. "Okay, they're heading to the gate. I'm flying the same route. This might get interesting." The young server who'd brought Victoria champagne watched them both leave. She shook her head slowly, then went back to work, knowing she'd just witnessed something that wouldn't end well. Gate B27 was already crowded with passengers clutching boarding passes, carry-ons at their feet, eyes on the departure board. David reached the podium first, his boarding pass already pulled up on his phone. The gate agent scanned it with a beep and a smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Monroe. We're pleased to have you flying with us today." David nodded his thanks and walked down the jet bridge, the carpet muffling his footsteps. The walkway smelled like recycled air and jet fuel, that particular airport smell that was the same whether you were in New York or Tokyo or anywhere in between. He turned left into first class. The cabin opened before him. Cream leather seats arranged in a 2-2 configuration, soft overhead lighting that made everyone look better than they did in harsh terminal fluorescence, the quiet murmur of early boarders settling in. Seat 2, A window. David stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, slid into his seat, and pulled out his book again. He adjusted the noise-canceling headphones around his neck, but didn't put them on yet. Just held them there ready. Victoria boarded 4 minutes later. She walked down the aisle with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, pulling her Gucci carry-on behind her with one-hand designer handbag on her shoulder. She scanned seat numbers as she walked. 2 C aisle seat. 2 seats away from David with 1 empty seat between them, 2B, the middle blessedly vacant. Victoria stopped dead. Her mouth opened slightly. Her grip tightened on the handle of her carry-on. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. David glanced up from his book, registered her presence with the smallest nod, then returned to his reading without comment. Victoria stood in the aisle, blocking the passengers behind her. An elderly woman cleared her throat politely. A businessman shifted his weight, waiting. "Excuse me," Victoria said loudly, directing her words at David. David removed one side of his headphones. "Yes, we need to talk. About what? About this?" She gestured at the seats with a sweep of her hand. "This arrangement isn't going to work for me." David looked at her steadily, his expression unchanged. "I'm in my assigned seat." "So am I," Victoria said. "But I specifically requested extra space when I booked. This is not what I paid for." "Ma'am, you'll need to take your seat," a voice said from behind. Carmen Rodriguez appeared, 45, senior flight attendant, 20 years in the air name tag, gleaming against her Navy uniform. She had the kind of calm that comes from having seen every passenger drama imaginable. "We need to prepare for departure." Victoria turned to Carmen, and her voice immediately softened, became reasonable. "Hi, yes. I'm sorry, I'm in 2C and I'm just very sensitive to my personal space when I fly. Is there any possibility I could move to a different seat? I'd be happy to wait if something opens up." Carmen pulled out her tablet, scrolled through the seat map with practiced efficiency. "The flight is completely full today, ma'am. But if there's a specific issue that's making you uncomfortable?" "The issue," Victoria said, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence, "is that I paid $7,000 for this ticket. I expect a certain level of comfort, a certain environment." "And you'll have that?" Carmen said, her tone still professional but firming slightly. "But I'm not sure what you'd like me to do if the flight is full." Victoria leaned in slightly close enough that only Carmen could hear clearly. "Look, I'm sure he's fine, but I just don't feel entirely safe sitting this close to someone who looks like someone I don't know." Carmen's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. The practiced smile stayed in place, but it no longer reached. "Ma'am, all passengers have been screened through security. There's no safety issue here. That's not what I meant." "Then, what did you mean?" David said quietly, his voice cutting through without rising. Victoria spun toward him. "This is a private conversation." "It's about me," David said, "so I'm already in it." Sarah Bennett entered first class at that moment, spotted the tension immediately, and felt that familiar tingle that told her something was about to be worth documenting. She took her seat 4A with a clear view of the situation. Her phone was already out, camera app open, recording, starting with a casual swipe. Bradley Pierce, a junior flight attendant at 29 years old, hurried over from the galley where he'd been stowing supplies. "Carmen, everything okay? Need some help here?" "We're fine," Carmen said firmly. "No, we're not," Victoria said. "I need this gentleman moved to another seat." Bradley looked at David, then at Victoria, then back at David. His eyes did the calculation that too many people do, assessing, categorizing, making assumptions based on appearance. "Sir, would you be willing to switch seats?" Bradley asked. "Maybe we could find you something more comfortable in economy." The words landed like a stone. Carmen's head snapped toward Bradley. "Excuse me, I'm just trying to help de-escalate." "He has a first-class ticket," Carmen said. "He's not going anywhere. But if the lady is uncomfortable, then the lady can choose to deplane." "Carmen," said, her voice steel-wrapped in velvet. Victoria's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am a platinum executive member of this airline. I know the CEO personally. If you don't handle this situation properly, I will make sure Ma'am Carmen interrupted her patience, visibly thinning. You need to take your seat now, or I'll need to ask you to leave the aircraft." From across the aisle, Michael Torres cleared his throat. He was seated in 2D directly across from David, and he'd been watching the entire exchange with increasing disgust. Ma'am Michael said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from commanding troops in combat zones, "He's not doing anything wrong." Victoria turned on him, eyes flashing. "No one asked for your opinion." "No," Michael agreed, "but I'm giving it anyway. That man is sitting quietly in his assigned seat. You're the one causing a scene. How dare you?" "I dare, because someone needs to say it," Michael continued. "Now sit down before you embarrass yourself further." The cabin had gone completely silent. Other passengers were staring now, some with phones out, some with expressions of shock or secondhand embarrassment. Victoria's hands shook, not from fear, from rage that she was losing control of the situation, of the narrative, of the deference she expected as her due. "I am not sitting next to him," she said, her voice rising to a level that made people in economy crane their necks to see what was happening. "Then you're deplaning," Carmen said flatly. "Those are your options. Choose." For a long moment, Victoria stood frozen in the aisle, her carefully constructed composure cracking at the edges. Then, with a sharp exhale, she threw herself into seat 2C, yanking her seatbelt across her lap with enough force to make the metal buckle clang. "This is unacceptable," she hissed to no one and everyone. "Completely unacceptable." Carmen walked away toward the galley, her jaw tight. Bradley lingered uncertain until Carmen gestured sharply for him to follow. David put his headphones back on and returned to his book, his face a mask of practiced calm. Sarah, in 4A, whispered to her phone camera. "You guys, this is insane. The flight hasn't even taken off yet. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm documenting everything." The cabin door sealed with a heavy thunk that signaled finality. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. Welcome aboard. Skybridge Flight 447 to London Heathrow. We've been cleared for pushback and should have you airborne shortly. Flight time today will be approximately 7 hours and 15 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The plane lurched gently backward from the gate. Victoria gripped her armrest, staring straight ahead, her breathing deliberately controlled. David turned a page in his book. In the galley, Carmen caught Bradley's arm. "What the hell were you thinking, suggesting he move? I was just trying to help." "You were enabling her," Carmen said. "Don't do it again." Michael Torres across the aisle caught David's eye and gave him a small nod of solidarity. David nodded back, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between two men who understood what the other was experiencing without needing to explain it. The plane taxied toward the runway engines, building to a roar. Nobody knew it yet, but in less than 3 hours, this flight would be making international news. And in less than 90 minutes, Victoria Ashford's life would be over as she knew it. The seatbelt sign chimed off with an electronic ding that was somehow both cheerful and ominous. The sound of freedom for some passengers, the starting gun for trouble for others. Victoria immediately reclined her seat. Not gradually, not with the courteous button press and slow lean back that considerate passengers use. She slammed it backward in one sharp motion, the mechanism clicking hard until the seat back pressed against the knees of the passenger behind her, except there wasn't one because 3A was empty. But the gesture was clear. David shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting to the sudden invasion of his already limited space. He said nothing. Didn't complain. Didn't press the call button. Just made the micro adjustment and continued reading. Victoria registered his lack of response with a flicker of frustration. She'd wanted a reaction, something she could point to, something that would justify calling Carmen over again. Carmen approached with a service cart, her professional smile back in place, but her eyes watchful. "Good afternoon. May I offer you something to drink before our meal service?" "Champagne," Victoria said without looking up from her phone. "Your best." Carmen poured from a bottle of Veuve Clicquot into a crystal flute and handed it over with practiced grace. "And for you, sir?" she asked David. "Water would be great." "Thank you," David said, removing one earphone politely. "Still, if you have it." "Of course." Carmen handed him a bottle of Fiji water with a small smile. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a shared understanding perhaps, or just mutual respect between two people being professional in an increasingly unprofessional situation. Victoria sipped her champagne and immediately shifted in her seat again, this time accidentally bumping David's armrest hard enough that his water bottle nearly tipped. David caught it smoothly, set it in the cup holder, and returned to his book without comment. 20 minutes passed. The plane climbed to cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for the meal service prep. Victoria stood abruptly, making a show of needing something from the overhead bin. "Excuse me," she said, not waiting for David to acknowledge her before reaching across his space. Her Gucci carry-on was in the back of the bin. She pulled it forward with unnecessary force, and a smaller cosmetic bag tumbled out, falling directly into David's lap. "Oh," Victoria said, her voice flat and unapologetic. "Sorry about that." She grabbed the small bag, shoved everything back into the overhead compartment with aggressive efficiency, and slammed the bin closed hard enough that other passengers glanced up. David carefully lifted the cosmetic bag from his lap and held it out to her without a word. Victoria snatched it from his hand. Michael Torres, watching from seat 2D, had seen enough. He leaned slightly across the aisle. "You okay, man?" he asked David quietly. David glanced at him, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm fine. She's doing that on purpose." "I know." Michael nodded slowly, something like respect settling in his eyes. "You've got more patience than I would." "I've had practice," David said simply. Michael understood. You didn't have to explain these things to someone who'd spent 20 years in the military, watching different versions of the same dynamic play out. Sarah Bennett in 4A was capturing everything on her phone. She'd already posted to Instagram stories currently on a flight where a woman is literally harassing the man next to her for existing. "I'm documenting everything because this is 2024, and we still have to deal with this. Hashtag traveling while black. Hashtag this is not okay." The comments were already rolling in. OMG, document everything. What airline? This is disgusting. Post the video. Bradley appeared again, approaching David with a tablet in hand. "Sir, I'm going to need you to keep your seat in the upright position during service." David looked at him confused. "It is upright." Bradley glanced at the seat, which was clearly obviously upright and had been the entire flight. "Right. Just," making sure Bradley said, then retreated quickly when Carmen shot him a warning look from the galley. Victoria watched this interaction with barely concealed satisfaction, as if Bradley's pointless intervention validated something she needed validated. She pulled out her phone and tried to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi. Connection failed. She tried again. Failed again. "Typical," she muttered loudly enough for David to hear. "Pay extra for Wi-Fi, that doesn't even work." She flagged down Bradley with an imperious wave. "The Wi-Fi isn't connecting. Let me check on that for you, ma'am." Bradley disappeared into the cockpit briefly, then returned. "I apologize, but we're experiencing some technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi system. It should be restored within the hour." Victoria's jaw tightened visibly. "That's unacceptable. I have work to do. Important work." "I understand your frustration, ma'am. I'll make sure to update you as soon as it's available." "See that you do," Victoria said dismissively. She turned to David as if this Wi-Fi failure were somehow his fault, his existence contributing to the general deterioration of her flight experience. "Can you believe this?" she said sharply to him. David removed one earphone slowly. "Sorry." "Nothing," Victoria snapped, turning away with exaggerated offense. In seat 3C, Thomas Grant, 67, retired sociology professor, had been watching the entire dynamic unfold with increasing concern. He'd taught about implicit bias, about microaggressions, about the small daily violences people inflicted on each other for 40 years. But seeing it in real time, seeing it directed at someone who was handling it with grace he wasn't sure he'd possess, was different. He caught Carmen's eye as she passed. "Excuse me, miss," he said quietly. "Is everything all right up there?" Carmen glanced toward seats 2A and 2C. "We're monitoring the situation." Thomas nodded gravely. "That woman is targeting him. You see that, right?" Carmen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes confirmed what Thomas had observed. "We're watching closely." "Good," Thomas said. "Because this is going to escalate. I've seen it before." The plane hit a patch of light turbulence, nothing serious, just a few bumps that made drinks shift in their holders and caused the seatbelt sign to ding back on. Victoria clutched her armrest dramatically, her knuckles going white. "Jesus Christ," she muttered loudly. "Can't they avoid this?" David glanced out the window at the clouds, unconcerned. He'd flown enough to know the difference between turbulence and actual danger. "It's just turbulence," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I know what it is," Victoria snapped at him. Another bump, slightly harder. Victoria's champagne flute tipped, spilling a few drops onto her cream skirt. "Damn it!" She grabbed a napkin, dabbing at the stain with furious precision. Then she turned to David, eyes blazing with an accusation she was ready to make, regardless of reality. "You bumped the tray table." David looked at her directly now, his calm starting to show the first hairline cracks. "I didn't move." "Yes, you did." "No." David said, his voice still quiet, but carrying a new weight. "I didn't." Victoria stood abruptly, despite the seatbelt sign still being illuminated. "Carmen," she called out, her voice cutting through the cabin. Carmen appeared immediately, concern etched on her face. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is on." "He bumped the table and made me spill champagne on my Armani skirt," Victoria said, pointing at David like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. Carmen looked at David. He was sitting perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, seatbelt fastened, looking like someone who hadn't moved in the last 10 minutes. "Sir, did you bump the table?" "No," David said simply. Carmen looked back at Victoria with the expression of someone whose patience had been tested beyond its reasonable limits. Ma'am, the plane hit turbulence. That's what caused the spill. I'm happy to bring you club soda to help with the stain. That's not the point. Ma'am Carmen interrupted, her voice firm now, all pretense of customer service softness gone. I need you to sit down immediately. Victoria sat, but her face had gone from red to a dangerous shade of crimson. The turbulence passed as quickly as it had come, but the tension in first class remained coiled and waiting. David stared out the window at the clouds passing 38,000 feet below their tops, lit golden by afternoon sun. From up here, everything looked peaceful, ordered, the world reduced to sky and cloud and the distant curve of earth. He'd always found something calming about flying, the enforced stillness, the temporary suspension between places, between identities, between the person you were when you left and the person you'd need to be when you arrived. But moments like this reminded him why he'd learned to find that calm in the first place. 20 years ago, he'd been on a different flight, different airline, different man, or maybe the same man, just younger, less certain, less aware of what the world would demand of him. He'd been 22 then. Fresh MBA from Howard University. Top of his class. 3 job offers waiting. He'd accepted the position at Goldman Sachs' junior analyst role, starting salary, that had made his mother cry happy tears in their small Baltimore apartment. The interview was in New York. He'd scraped together money for a business class seat on Amtrak, but a scheduling change forced him to fly instead. He'd found a deal on a business class ticket, still expensive, but he'd needed to arrive rested sharp, ready to convince these Wall Street executives that he belonged in their world. He'd worn his best suit, carried his father's old leather briefcase polished until it gleamed. He'd arrived at the airport 2 hours early because his mother had taught him that being on time meant being early when you couldn't afford to make mistakes. At the gate, the agent had stopped him. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass?" He'd handed it over, confused by the question. The gate agent had studied it for what felt like an eternity, eyes moving from the paper to his face and back again. "There's been an error with your seat assignment," she'd said finally. "What kind of error?" "This seat isn't available anymore. We'll need to move you." "But I paid for it. I have the confirmation. I understand, but there's been a system issue. We can offer you a seat in economy." "I need that seat," he'd said, trying to keep his voice calm, even as panic started rising. "I have an important interview. I need to arrive rested." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." 2 security guards had appeared. Not threatening exactly, just there, present. A reminder of what would happen if he made this difficult. He'd stepped aside, taken the economy seat, spent 6 hours cramped between a snoring businessman and a mother with a crying baby. Arrived in New York exhausted, rumpled, his carefully pressed suit wrinkled beyond saving. The interview had gone poorly. He'd been off his game, distracted, tired. They'd thanked him for his time, said they'd be in touch. They weren't. Later, he'd learned that his original business class seat had remained empty that entire flight. They hadn't given it to someone else. They hadn't overbooked it. They'd just decided he didn't belong there, that he must have made a mistake or gotten lucky with an error in the system or somehow scammed his way into a seat that surely wasn't meant for someone like him. David blinked, pulling himself back to the present. The memory had sharp edges even after all these years. That day had changed something in him. Not his determination that had always been there, inherited from parents who'd worked 2 jobs each to give him opportunities they'd never had. But it had changed his understanding of what determination would cost. He'd built his first company within 5 years, small regional airline consulting firm, then another, each one growing, succeeding, eventually merging or being acquired. By 30, he'd had enough capital to start investing in actual aircraft, not just advising airlines, but owning the planes they leased. Vertex Aviation Holdings was born from that first humiliation, from the knowledge that ownership meant more than money. It meant you couldn't be moved, couldn't be told you didn't belong, couldn't be erased by someone who decided your presence made them uncomfortable. Now he owned leases on over 300 aircraft worldwide. Revenue in the billions. Respect in the industry. Power that had been earned through decades of work that would have broken most people. He didn't fly first class because he could afford it. He flew first class because 20 years ago someone had decided he couldn't. And he'd spent every day since proving them wrong. Carmen appeared beside him, placing a fresh bottle of water on his tray table without being asked. "Doing all right?" she asked quietly. David looked up at her and managed a genuine smile. "Always." "I've been flying 20 years," Carmen said softly. "I've seen this before. Too many times." "I know. I won't let it escalate." "I appreciate that," David said. "But you might not be able to stop it." Carmen frowned. "What do you mean?" David didn't answer directly. He just looked past her toward Victoria, who was scrolling aggressively through her phone with the jerky movements of someone barely containing rage. "Some people can't be stopped," he said finally. "They can only be held accountable after." Carmen wanted to ask what he meant by that, but a call light dinged from economy, and she had to go. David returned his gaze to the window. The clouds passed below, indifferent and beautiful. The meal service began 90 minutes into the flight. Carmen and Bradley moved through first class with practiced efficiency, presenting menus and taking orders with the kind of choreographed rhythm that comes from doing the same dance thousands of times. Carmen approached Victoria, first professional smile firmly in place. "Good afternoon, ma'am. For our main course this evening, we have a choice of herb-crusted chicken breast with roasted vegetables, pan-seared beef tenderloin with a red wine reduction, or a Mediterranean vegetable plate with quinoa and tahini dressing. What would you prefer? Do you have anything low-carb?" Victoria asked, not looking up from her phone. "The beef and the vegetable plate are both relatively low in carbohydrates," Carmen offered. "I'll have the beef," Victoria said. "And another champagne. The good stuff." "Of course." Carmen noted the order on her tablet and moved to David. "And for you, sir?" "The vegetable plate sounds excellent," David said, setting his book down. "Thank you." "My pleasure. And to drink?" "Just water is fine." Carmen nodded and moved away to prepare the meals. Victoria, who'd been half listening, couldn't resist. "Of course," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. David heard it, registered it, chose not to engage. The meals arrived 15 minutes later. Carmen served Victoria's beef with genuine care. The presentation was actually beautiful, the kind of attention to detail that first-class pricing supposedly guaranteed. Victoria cut into it immediately, knife scraping against the plate with more force than necessary. She chewed with exaggerated satisfaction. She said loudly, performing her enjoyment for an audience of one. "This is actually really good. You can really taste the quality. Premium ingredients. First-class service. This is why I pay for first-class actual quality." David ate his vegetable plate in silence, finding it genuinely good and not needing to announce that fact to anyone. Victoria leaned slightly toward him, invading the invisible boundary between their spaces. "How's your vegetables?" The pause before the word was deliberate weighted with contempt. "They're fine, thank you," David said without looking at her. "I mean, I'm sure they're adequate," Victoria continued. "If you like that sort of thing. Personally, I need protein, real food, but everyone has their preferences, I suppose." David set down his fork carefully and turned to face her directly for the first time since takeoff. "Is there something you want to say to me?" Victoria blinked with manufactured innocence. "What do you mean? You've been making comments since we boarded. I have no idea what you're talking about." "Yes," David said quietly. "You do." Victoria's face flushed, but this time with anger rather than embarrassment. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm observing," David said, his voice still calm but carrying new steel. "There's a difference." Michael Torres, who'd been trying to mind his business and failing, leaned across the aisle. Ma'am, can you just let the man eat in peace? Victoria turned on him like a cornered animal. This is a private conversation. No, it's not, Michael said flatly. You're talking loud enough for half the cabin to hear, and you've been harassing him since we got on this plane. Harassing Victoria's voice rose dangerously. I am not harassing anyone. How dare you, ma'am? Carmen appeared as if summoned, her expression no longer even attempting warmth. I need you to lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do, Victoria snapped. These men are ganging up on me. I'm the victim here. Michael let out a short, sharp laugh. That's not what's happening, Ma'am Carmen said, her voice dropping to a tone that meant business. I need you to lower your voice and remain calm, or I'll have to inform the captain. Fine, Victoria said, slamming back into her seat with enough force to make it shake. Fine, I'll be quiet, even though I'm the one being treated unfairly. Carmen walked back to the galley, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed frustration. She pulled out her phone and texted the captain. First class situation escalating. Passenger harassing another passenger. Need to brief you soon. In the cockpit, Captain Rodriguez read the message and frowned. Problem? His co-pilot asked. Passenger issue. First class. Want me to go back? Not yet, but prepare an incident report just in case. Back in the cabin, Victoria waited exactly 5 minutes before her next move. She stood abruptly, grabbing her designer handbag. Excuse me, she said to no one in particular, pushing past David's legs without waiting for him to move them. She walked to the lavatory at the front of first-class heels, clicking against the floor with sharp, angry sounds. Inside the small bathroom, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect. Hair still styled flawlessly. The image of success and sophistication. But her eyes showed something else. Something unraveling. She pulled out her phone and tried the Wi-Fi again. Still not connecting. Damn it, she whispered viciously. She'd wanted to call her friend Diane, who worked in legal, get advice on how to escalate this, how to make a formal complaint, how to ensure that man faced consequences for making her flight uncomfortable. But without Wi-Fi, she was trapped in this tube of metal with him unable to summon the backup she needed. She took a deep breath, reapplied her lipstick even though it didn't need it, smoothed her skirt. She had a plan. When she returned to her seat, she didn't immediately sit down. Instead, she opened the overhead bin again, making another show of needing something. As she reached past David, closer than necessary, invading his space deliberately, she accidentally brushed against his shoulder with her hip. Oops, she said flatly. Sorry. Tight quarters. David said nothing. Didn't react. Just continued reading with the patience of someone who'd had to develop infinite reserves of it. Victoria sat down and waited another 5 minutes. Then she flagged Carmen down again. Carmen approached with visible reluctance. Yes, ma'am. I need to report something, Victoria said quietly, voice low and serious. Carmen's expression shifted to concern. What is it? That man Victoria gestured subtly toward David. He touched me. The cabin seemed to contract, all air suddenly sucked out. Carmen stared at her. What did you say? When I walked past just now going to the restroom, Victoria continued, voice shaking slightly with either genuine emotion or brilliant performance. He touched my leg. Inappropriately. It made me very uncomfortable. David removed his headphones, his calm finally cracking into something that looked like disbelief. That's not true. Yes, it is, Victoria said, turning to face him with tears beginning to form in her eyes. You brushed my thigh as I walked past. I felt it clearly. I didn't move, David said, his voice still controlled but harder now. You did, Victoria insisted, and it was inappropriate, and I want it documented. Sarah in seat 4. A spoke up immediately, her voice cutting through the tension. That's a lie. I was watching. He didn't move at all. His hands were on his book the entire time. Michael nodded emphatically. Same here. I had a clear view. He never moved. Thomas Grant from 3C added his voice. Young lady, I saw the whole thing. He was sitting perfectly still. You're the one who invaded his space. Victoria's voice rose higher, taking on a note of hysteria. So now, you're all going to call me a liar. You're all protecting him. We're telling the truth, Sarah said firmly. They're lying. Victoria stood again, pointing at the three witnesses. They're protecting him because... She couldn't finish the sentence. Because finishing it would make the subtext text, would make the implication explicit, would force her to admit what everyone in the cabin already understood. Carmen looked between Victoria and David, then at the three witnesses, then back to Victoria. Ma'am, I have multiple passengers stating that Mr. Monroe didn't move. They're wrong. Or, Carmen said carefully, you are. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked. I want to speak to the captain. Right now. Ma'am, I said. Now. The cockpit door opened. Captain Rodriguez stepped out, 48 years old, composed 25 years of flying experience written in the calm authority of his posture. He took in the scene quickly, the standing passenger, the seated passenger looking exhausted, the witnesses watching with expressions ranging from sympathy to disgust. What seems to be the problem? He asked calmly. Victoria launched into her version of events. Harassment from the moment they boarded, inappropriate touching, threatening behavior, fear for her safety, the crew not taking her seriously, other passengers defending him instead of her. Captain Rodriguez listened without interrupting, his face neutral. When she finished, he turned to David. Sir, did you touch this passenger? No, David said simply. He's lying, Victoria said. Rodriguez looked at Carmen. What did you observe multiple witnesses confirm he didn't move? Captain, Carmen said. And this passenger has been making complaints about Mr. Monroe since boarding, none of which have been substantiated. Rodriguez nodded slowly. He turned back to Victoria, and his voice, while still professional, carried unmistakable steel. Ma'am, I take all allegations seriously, but I also have to consider witness testimony, and right now I have 3 passengers stating that your claim is false. So you believe them over me. Victoria's voice broke. I believe the evidence Rodriguez said. This is discrimination. Victoria said, the words tumbling out without thought. The irony hung in the air like acrid smoke. Rodriguez's expression didn't change. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you once return to your seat and remain quiet for the remainder of this flight. If there are any further disruptions, we will divert this aircraft and have you removed by authorities. Do you understand? Victoria stared at him, chest-heaving tears now flowing freely. Finally, she sat down hard, buckling her seatbelt with shaking hands. Rodriguez nodded to Carmen and returned to the cockpit. The cabin remained in shocked silence. David put his headphones back on, but he didn't press play on his music. He just sat there waiting, because he knew with the certainty of experience that this wasn't over. Some people couldn't stop themselves. They could only be stopped. The cabin settled into an uneasy quiet that felt less like peace and more like the pause before a storm breaks. 30 minutes passed. The meal service was cleared. Most passengers returned to their movies, their books, their work. But in first class, everyone remained acutely aware of the tension coiled in seats 2A and 2C, like a spring compressed past its limits. Victoria sat rigid, her jaw clenched so tight her temples throbbed with each heartbeat. Her hands gripped the armrests as if letting go might cause her to float away, to lose her last anchor to control. She stared at the seat back in front of her, but she wasn't seeing it. She was seeing the faces of the witnesses who'd contradicted her, the flight attendant who'd sided against her, the captain who'd threatened her. And she was seeing him, David, still sitting there, still calm, still reading his book as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just humiliated her in front of everyone. The Wi-Fi system chimed back to life. A notification popped up on her phone. Connection restored. Victoria grabbed her phone like a lifeline. She opened her email first, typed furiously to her boss. Delayed but will make the London meeting. Dealing with unacceptable situation on flight. Will explain in person. Then a text to her friend Diane at Morrison & Associates. Need legal advice. Being harassed on Skybridge 447. Crew refusing to help. What are my options? Then, before she could stop herself, she opened LinkedIn. 20,000 followers. All colleagues, clients, professional contacts. People who respected her, who saw her as successful, as someone who had it together. She typed currently dealing with an incredibly uncomfortable situation on Skybridge Airlines Flight 447. Despite multiple complaints about aggressive passenger behavior, the crew has failed to ensure my safety. This is what happens when airlines prioritize optics over passenger protection. Unacceptable. Hashtag travel safety. Hashtag customer service. Hashtag airline accountability. She hit post before she could reconsider. Sarah Bennett, monitoring her own social media from seat 4A, saw Victoria's post within seconds. Someone had tagged her in a comment. Sarah, you're on that flight. What's really happening? Sarah opened her video files. She had everything. The lounge confrontation, the boarding tension, the meal service escalation, the false accusation. She'd been holding back, unsure whether to post, whether it was her place to amplify the situation. Victoria's LinkedIn post made the decision for her. Sarah posted the compilation to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok simultaneously. Caption: Woman claims she's being harassed by man next to her. Here's what actually happened. Judge for yourself. Hashtag actual footage. Hashtag stop lying. The videos went live. Within minutes, they started spreading. Within 10 minutes, they had 50,000 views. Within 20 minutes, someone had identified Victoria Ashford from her LinkedIn profile and connected the dots. Victoria, scrolling through her own post's comments, watched in real time as the narrative shifted beneath her. Just saw the videos. You're the one harassing him. This is disgraceful behavior. Glad there's footage. The truth matters. At Skybridge, what are you doing about this passenger? Victoria's hands began to shake. She tried to delete her post. Too late. Screenshots existed now. Her words had been captured, preserved, spread beyond her ability to recall them. Her phone buzzed. A call from her boss. She declined it. Another buzz. Diane. Declined. Another. Her mother. Declined. She shoved the phone into the seat pocket in front of her as if physical distance could stop the cascade of consequences building behind the screen. David, unaware of the digital firestorm beginning to swirl around the flight, turned another page in his book. He was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me for the third time. Some books you returned to when you needed reminding of truths you already knew, but the world kept trying to make you forget. Victoria stood abruptly, grabbing her handbag. I need to make a call, she announced to no one, heading toward the back of first class, where she'd seen other passengers standing earlier. Carmen intercepted her. Ma'am, the seatbelt sign isn't on, but I'd prefer if you remained in your seat. I'm just going to stand for a moment, Victoria said, her voice tight. I need to stretch my legs. That's allowed, isn't it? Carmen hesitated, then nodded. Of course, but please stay in the first-class cabin. Victoria moved to the small galley area near the lavatory. She pulled out her phone again, stepping into a corner as if privacy existed in a space 12 feet across. She called Diane. It went to voicemail. She called her boss. Voicemail. She called her father, a semi-retired attorney in Connecticut. He answered on the third ring. "Victoria, everything okay, Dad?" "I need your help," she said, voice breaking. "I'm on a flight and there's a situation. A man has been making me uncomfortable, and the airline won't do anything, and now people are posting lies about me online and—" "Slow down," her father said. "What kind of situation?" "I felt threatened by a passenger. He touched me. But the crew is protecting him. And now there are videos I don't know where they came from, and people are saying horrible things. Victoria did. He actually touched you." Silence. "Victoria, He was threatening. His presence was threatening, and when you feel threatened, you're allowed to defend yourself. Did he touch you?" Her father repeated, his attorney voice emerging. "Not physically, but—" "Oh, God," her father breathed. "Victoria, what did you do?" "I tried to protect myself." How Victoria couldn't answer. "How did you protect yourself, Victoria?" I may have escalated." "Tell me you didn't hit him." Silence. "Victoria, tell me you didn't hit someone on an airplane." He was standing up, getting in my face. "That's not what I asked." The call dropped. Connection lost. Victoria stared at her phone, at the words, "Call failed" on the screen, and something inside her broke completely. She wasn't a violent person. She'd never hit anyone in her life. She'd been raised with privilege, yes, but also with the understanding that physical violence was for other people, lesser people, people without education or sophistication or control. But standing there in the galley, watching her life disintegrate on a screen in her hand, she felt control slipping away like water through fingers. She walked back to her seat. David was still reading, still calm, still there. Taking up space she'd decided he shouldn't occupy. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" she hissed as she passed him. David looked up slowly, removed his headphones. "Enjoying what? Ruining my flight. Playing the victim. Having everyone rush to protect you." David closed his book, marked the page carefully with his finger. "I'm sitting in a seat," he said quietly. "That's all I'm doing." "You're doing more than that," Victoria said, voice rising despite herself. "What am I doing?" "You're making me look like the villain, because I dared to speak up about not feeling safe." Safe from what David asked, and his voice held genuine curiosity, as if he really wanted her to articulate the answer. Victoria leaned down, face inches from his. "From people like you. People who don't belong in spaces like this. People who make everyone uncomfortable and then act like we're the problem for noticing." The cabin went silent. Conversations stopped mid-word. Passengers turned in their seats. David stood up slowly. He didn't move toward her, didn't raise his hands, didn't make any gesture that could be construed as threatening. He just stood. But he was taller than Victoria had realized when he was sitting. Broader. His presence suddenly filled the space in a way that made the width of the aisle feel smaller. "I belong everywhere I choose to be," he said quietly, each word deliberate and clear. "And no one, not you, not anyone, gets to tell me otherwise." Victoria's hand moved before her brain could catch up to what her body was doing. Open palm, across David's face. Crack! The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot in a library. David's head snapped to the side from the force of it. The metal of her diamond ring caught his cheekbone, and a thin line of red appeared immediately, blood welling up and beginning to run. Silence. Absolute. Total. Complete. No one breathed. David's head turned back slowly. He brought one hand up to touch his face, fingers coming away red. He looked at the blood on his fingertips for a long moment, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Then he looked at Victoria. His expression wasn't angry, wasn't aggressive. It was disappointed. And somehow that was worse. "Oh my God!" Sarah screamed from 4A, her phone already up, recording, capturing everything. Michael Torres was out of his seat in a second. "What the hell is wrong with you, Thomas?" Grant stood pointing at Victoria with a shaking finger. "I saw it. She assaulted him. Everyone saw it." Other passengers started shouting. "She hit him. Call the police. That's assault. Someone needs to restrain her." Carmen ran forward, Bradley right behind her. "Ma'am, step back," Carmen commanded, positioning herself between Victoria and David. Victoria backed away, her hand still raised, trembling violently. She was breathing hard, looking at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. "He was threatening me," she said, voice shaking. He stood up. "He was going to attack me. It was self-defense." "That's bullshit," Michael shouted. "He was just standing there. He was intimidating me by standing." "By existing, you mean?" Sarah yelled. "I have it all on video. You assaulted him." David still hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything except touch his cheek where blood was now running freely. He reached into his hoodie pocket, slowly, carefully conscious that sudden movements might escalate an already explosive situation. He pulled out a phone. Not a smartphone. A satellite phone. Heavy. Black. Serious. The kind of equipment that means you're someone who needs to stay connected regardless of where you are in the world. Victoria's eyes widened. "What is that?" David didn't answer her. He dialed a number from memory. It connected on the second ring. "Rachel," he said calmly, voice steady despite the blood on his face. "It's me." On the other end, Rachel Kim's voice came through sharp with immediate concern. "David, are you okay?" "No," he said. "I need you to invoke Protocol 7. Silence on the other end, a beat of processing. "Say that again?" Rachel asked carefully, her tone shifting from concern to professional crisis mode. "Protocol 7. I've been assaulted on Skybridge Flight 447. Authorization code Vertex Alpha 92. Another pause longer this time. "David, are you certain that protocol means I'm certain? Execute it now. Understood. Executing Protocol 7 immediately. Do you need medical?" "Just execute the protocol. I'll handle the rest." David ended the call. He looked at Victoria, who was staring at the phone in his hand as if it might explode. "What did you just do?" she whispered. David didn't answer immediately. He pulled a cocktail napkin from the seat pocket and pressed it against his bleeding cheek. His movements deliberate and calm despite the situation. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet enough that only the front few rows could hear clearly. "I made a phone call." Carmen was already on the interphone to the cockpit. "Captain Rodriguez, we have a code red situation in first class. Passenger has physically assaulted another passenger. Visible injury. Blood present. Request immediate priority landing and law enforcement response." In the cockpit, Captain Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. A code red. In 25 years of flying, he'd only dealt with 3 of them. "Copy that, Carmen. Contact ground immediately. Prepare for emergency diversion. I'll make the announcement." The PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. Due to a serious onboard incident, we will be diverting to Boston Logan International Airport. We will be landing in approximately 40 minutes. I apologize for the inconvenience, but this decision is made in the interest of safety. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Murmurs rippled through the entire aircraft. Passengers in economy craned their necks trying to see what was happening. The word spread like wildfire someone in first class had been assaulted. Victoria sank into her seat, her face draining of color. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. This isn't... I didn't mean..." "Ma'am," Carmen said firmly, "you are to remain in your seat and not speak to anyone until we land. Do you understand?" Victoria didn't respond. She was staring at her phone as notifications started flooding in. Her LinkedIn post had been shared 3,000 times. Her name was being tagged everywhere. The videos were spreading. Her career, her reputation, her life, all of it unraveling in real time at 38,000 feet. In a Manhattan office building, Rachel Kim moved with the precision of someone executing a disaster protocol she'd hoped never to use. She was 31, sharply dressed, even at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, her desk a model of organized efficiency. She pulled up the emergency contact list on her computer, her fingers already dialing the first number before the screen fully loaded. Skybridge Airline's corporate headquarters. How may I direct your call? This is Rachel Kim calling on behalf of David Monroe, CEO of Vertex Aviation Holdings. I need to speak to your Chief Operations Officer immediately. This is Priority 1. Ma'am, I'll need to take a message. No messages. Priority 1. Emergency protocol. Patch me through to James Hendricks now, or this conversation becomes a problem for both of us. Something in Rachel's voice made the receptionist comply. The line clicked, held clicked again. This is James Hendricks, COO. Who am I speaking with? Rachel Kim, Executive Assistant to David Monroe of Vertex Aviation Holdings. Mr. Monroe has been physically assaulted aboard Skybridge Flight 447. I'm authorized to invoke Clause 14B of your fleet lease agreement. The pause that followed was profound. You're invoking Clause 14B. Yes, effective immediately. Ground the fleet. Ms. Kim, do you understand what you're asking? That clause was included as a safety provision, allowing the lessor to suspend operations if passenger safety is compromised. Yes, I'm aware. I'm also aware that Mr. Monroe is bleeding from a head wound inflicted by one of your passengers while your crew failed to prevent the escalation. So I'm not asking Mr. Hendricks. I'm informing you. The clause is clear. Execute it now. I'll need to verify. You can verify while you're grounding planes. You have my direct number. David will be available after the aircraft lands. But the grounding begins now. Rachel hung up before he could respond. She immediately dialed the second number on the list, then the third, then the fourth. FAA Emergency Liaison, Federal Authorities, Corporate Legal, Media Relations on standby. By the time Flight 447 began its descent toward Boston, the entire aviation industry knew. Vertex Aviation Holdings had invoked the safety clause. Skybridge Airlines was being grounded. In the Skybridge corporate office in Atlanta, panic had already begun. James Hendricks stood in the operations center watching the real-time fleet map as ground control began issuing holds. Planes that were about to push back stayed at their gates. Planes in the air were allowed to continue to their destinations, but nothing new was taking off. 70% of their fleet operated under Vertex leases. 70% of their operation was about to stop. The CFO burst into the room. Tell me this isn't happening. It's happening, Hendricks said, his voice hollow. On what grounds assault? Passenger safety compromise. They're invoking the lease clause. That clause was supposed to be symbolic. A gesture. No one actually... Someone just did. The CEO's phone was already ringing. The board chair, the PR director, the FAA liaison. Everyone calling at once, everyone demanding to know what was happening and how to fix it. Nobody had an answer yet. On Flight 447, Victoria's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her boss, call me now, corporate legal, do not speak to press, attorney incoming, her assistant. Your 2 p.m. tomorrow just canceled. So did your 4 p.m. What's happening, Diane? Her lawyer friend, Vic. I can't represent you. Conflict of interest. You need criminal defense. Calling some names now. She opened Twitter with shaking hands. Her name was trending. Hashtag Victoria Ashford. Hashtag Skybridge Assault. Hashtag First Class. Karen. Video clips everywhere. The slap from multiple angles. Passengers had filmed it. The videos were already at 10 million views. Comments rolled in by the thousands. She needs to be arrested. This is disgusting behavior. Imagine assaulting someone and shutting down an entire airline. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I hope she loses everything. Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. She fumbled for the airsick bag in the seat pocket, certain she was about to vomit. She didn't, but the nausea remained rolling through her in waves that matched the turbulence as the plane began its descent. David sat quietly, the napkin still pressed to his cheek. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the cut was clearly visible, the bruising already starting to darken the skin around it. Michael leaned across the aisle, his voice low. "You really own the planes." David nodded once. "Damn," Michael breathed. She picked the wrong person. She would have picked any black person in this seat, David said quietly. I just happen to be one who can do something about it. Thomas Grant spoke up from behind them. Will the airline survive this? David turned slightly to look at him. That depends on what they do in the next 72 hours. Sarah was still live streaming, her follower count jumping every time she refreshed. 200,000. 300,000. 500,000 people watching in real time. Guys, we're about to land in Boston, she said into the camera. There are police vehicles waiting on the tarmac. I can see them out the window. This is absolutely insane. Her chat was moving too fast to read. She's going to jail justice. Record everything. Sarah. This is history. The plane descended through clouds, breaking into clear air above Boston. The city sprawled below them, lights beginning to glow as evening approached. The airport came into view, and with it, the emergency vehicles already positioning themselves. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars with lights flashing, news vans from every local station. Oh my God, someone whispered. The aircraft touched down smoothly, reverse thrust, engaging with a roar. They slowed, turned, began taxiing toward a remote gate away from the main terminal. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the PA one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed in Boston. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Authorities will be boarding the aircraft shortly. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. The plane came to a complete stop. The engines wound down to silence, and in that silence, Victoria began to cry. Not the performative tears she'd used earlier to gain sympathy. Real tears. The kind that come when you finally understand that you've done something irreversible and the world has collectively decided you will face every consequence. Carmen approached David one more time. Sir, paramedics will want to examine you when we deplane. I'm fine, David said. I understand, but I need to insist. It's procedure. David nodded his acceptance. Carmen turned to Victoria. Ma'am, you need to remain in your seat. Don't stand. Don't move. Don't speak. Victoria didn't respond. She just stared at her lap, tears dripping onto her cream silk blouse, leaving dark spots that spread like stains you couldn't wash out. Michael walked across the aisle and extended his hand to David. Thank you for showing more restraint than most men would have, he said. David shook his hand firmly. Violence isn't the answer. No. Michael agreed. But sometimes accountability is. The cabin door opened with a mechanical hiss. Cold Boston air rushed in. FBI agents boarded first badges displayed. Behind them, EMTs with medical kits. Behind them, uniformed Boston police officers. The lead FBI agent, 40-something crew-cut expression that had seen everything and been surprised by none of it, surveyed the cabin with professional assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Sullivan with the FBI. We're investigating an alleged assault that occurred on this aircraft. Please remain seated while we conduct interviews. His eyes scanned the cabin until Carmen pointed him toward David and Victoria. He walked forward, his partner flanking him. Ma'am, Sullivan said to Victoria, his voice firm but not unkind. I need you to stand up, please. Victoria looked up, mascara streaking down her face, and for a moment it seemed she might refuse. Then she stood on shaking legs. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Wait. I can explain, ma'am. Turn around. Victoria turned. Cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists with a sound of absolute finality. Victoria Ashford, you're under arrest for assault and battery interference with flight crew operations and creating a disturbance on an aircraft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Victoria's legs buckled. An officer caught her, held her upright as the Miranda rights continued. She was walked down the aisle in handcuffs. Every passenger watched in silence. Sarah filmed every second. As Victoria passed David's seat, she stopped, turned her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. David looked at her for a long moment. "No, you're not," he said quietly. "You're sorry you got caught." Victoria was let off the plane, the agents holding her steady as she stumbled down the jet bridge toward whatever came next. The terminal was chaos. David had been the last passenger to deplane Carmen, walking beside him with professional concern etched on her face. At the end of the jet bridge, Rachel Kim waited, 31 years old, sharp, charcoal suit iPad under her arm, expression fierce enough to clear space around her. She saw David emerge with the bandage on his cheek and exhaled a breath she'd been holding for 40 minutes. "Are you okay?" she asked, immediately moving toward him. "I'm fine, Rachel." "You don't look fine. You look like you got hit in the face." "That's because I did." "Hospital. Now." "Rachel, I've been checked by the EMTs." "Who looked at you in a cramped airplane galley with limited equipment?" Rachel interrupted. "You need a full examination. Photos for evidence. Documentation for legal proceedings." "This is protocol, David." "Hospital." David smiled faintly despite everything. "You're good at this." "I know. Now walk." They moved through the gate area, which had been cordoned off by airport security. News crews waited at the barriers, cameras pointing like weapons, reporters shouting questions that blurred together into white noise. "Mr. Monroe, is it true you've grounded Skybridge Airlines?" "Mr. Monroe. How serious is your injury, Mr. Monroe? What do you want to happen to the woman who hit you?" "Mr. Monroe, will Skybridge survive this?" Rachel stepped in front of David, her small frame radiating enough authority to make hardened reporters pause. "No questions at this time. Mr. Monroe will be issuing a statement within the next 24 hours. Until then, please direct all inquiries to Vertex Aviation Holdings Corporate Communications. Thank you." They pushed through the crowd airport security, clearing a path. Across the terminal, Victoria was being walked through a different corridor, hands cuffed behind her back, face puffy and red from crying, flanked by 2 Boston police officers who guided her with firm but not rough hands. Her perp walk was briefer but no less filmed. News crews swarmed phones, lifted flashes, popping. "Ms. Ashford." "Why did you hit him?" "Ms. Ashford." "Do you have a statement?" "Ms. Ashford, are you a racist, Ms. Ashford? Did you know who he was?" Victoria kept her head down, feet stumbling over themselves until one reporter shouted loud enough to make her flinch. "Your LinkedIn says you're an executive at Whitfield Investments. Do they know you've been arrested?" Victoria's step faltered. The officers steadied her and kept moving. Sarah Bennett was live streaming from the terminal, her phone held at arm's length to capture her face and the chaos behind her. "Guys, we just landed. The woman who assaulted the CEO, and yes, he's a CEO, I'll explain in a second, has been arrested. I'm watching her being escorted by police right now. This has been the wildest flight of my entire life. Her follower count was climbing in real time. 500,000, 600,000, 700,000. Comments exploded across her screen. Justice served. She's going to jail. This is what accountability looks like, Sarah. You're a hero for filming. Michael Torres stood with a different group of reporters near his gate, still in his travel clothes, American flag pin on his jacket collar catching the light. Colonel Torres, you witnessed the entire incident I did. I'm a retired Air Force colonel. I've been in actual combat situations. I've faced real danger. That man he gestured in the direction David had gone did nothing threatening. Nothing. She targeted him from the moment she saw him. When he wouldn't be intimidated, she escalated. When he still wouldn't react, she got violent. That's not defense. That's assault. Will you testify if charges are filed? Absolutely. Every word is on record, and I'll repeat it under oath. Thomas Grant gave his own interview at another cluster of reporters. I'm a retired sociology professor, he said, his voice steady and clear. I taught about implicit bias and discrimination for 40 years. I know the patterns. I saw every single one play out today. That young man showed dignity and restraint that honestly humbled me. He's an example of strength that has nothing to do with power and everything to do with character. Do you think race was a factor? Thomas looked directly at the camera. I think if he'd been white, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think most of you know that's true. Boston Medical Center, 40 minutes later. David sat in a private examination room, Rachel beside him with her iPad out, already fielding calls and coordinating next steps. A Dr. 50s kind, eyes steady hands, examined David's cheek with gentle precision. The cut is superficial, thankfully. No signs of concussion. You'll have bruising for a week or so, maybe longer. I'm going to clean this properly and document everything. She took photographs from multiple angles, made detailed notes. Do you want to press charges? Already being handled, Rachel said before David could answer. After the doctor left, Rachel pulled up her tablet and began reading through updates. Okay, status report. Go ahead, David said, touching his newly bandaged cheek gingerly. Skybridge's stock dropped 23% in the 90 minutes since we invoked the clause. Trading was halted twice. CEO Brennan is calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. They desperately want to speak with you. Not yet. Media requests are flooding in. Every major network, every cable news channel, international press. I have 67 interview requests as of 10 minutes ago. No interviews. Legal called. They're drafting the civil suit. Criminal charges are being handled by the DA's office in Boston. They want your statement tomorrow morning. Schedule it. And... Rachel hesitated, looking up from her screen. Twitter is a lot right now. David raised an eyebrow. Show me. Rachel turned the tablet toward him. Hashtag David Monroe was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Millions of tweets. This man sat there bleeding and made one phone call. That's power. Black excellence isn't being loud. It's this. Dignity under pressure. The way he didn't raise his voice, didn't raise his fist, just raised the stakes. Iconic. This is what real strength looks like. David scrolled slowly, his expression unreadable. Then Rachel swiped to a different section. There's more. It gets emotional. Hundreds, thousands of black professionals sharing their own stories. I've been David Monroe. Different plane, same treatment. The composure it takes not to react when someone treats you like that. People who haven't lived it don't understand. He did what all of us wish we could do, held them accountable. To everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, you do. We all do. David read in silence for a long moment. You okay? Rachel asked softly. Yeah, he said, his voice quiet. I wish it didn't have to be news. I wish I could have just flown to London. I know, but it is news, so we handle it. How do you want to handle it? David thought, his hand resting on his chin. Press conference. Tomorrow morning. Here in Boston before we fly back to New York. What are you going to say? The truth. Victoria, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell at Boston Police Headquarters. She'd been photographed mugshot that would be on TMZ within the hour. She'd been fingerprinted. She'd been processed through the system with mechanical efficiency. Each step documented each piece of her carefully constructed identity, stripped away and catalogued. Now she sat on a metal bench in a cell that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation head in her hands, still wearing her cream silk blouse with champagne stains and tear tracks. A public defender approached the bars. "Ms. Ashford, I'm Attorney Chen from the Public Defender's Office. I want a private lawyer," Victoria said without looking up. "Ma'am, I understand, but you should know that you've been terminated from your employment. Your bank accounts may be frozen pending civil litigation. You may not be able to afford. Just get me out of here. Bail won't be set until your arraignment tomorrow morning." Victoria's head snapped up. "Tomorrow I have to stay here overnight." "Yes, ma'am. I can't stay in jail. I have meetings. I have a flight to London." "I have a presentation, ma'am, that's not going to happen. You're in custody pending arraignment." Victoria started crying again, the reality of her situation finally penetrating the shock that had insulated her since the handcuffs clicked shut. By 9 p.m., the story had transcended aviation news entirely. It was everywhere. TikTok videos with millions of views analyzing every angle. Instagram posts from influencers condemning Victoria. LinkedIn posts from executives discussing workplace discrimination. Twitter threads dissecting the power dynamics. YouTube commentary channels covering it in real time. Even celebrities weighed in. Just saw the Sky Bridge video. Absolutely disgusting behavior. Proud of David Monroe for handling it with grace and then holding everyone accountable. This is why we still need to talk about these issues in 2024. It's not history. It's Tuesday. When keeping it racist goes wrong, a case study. Whitfield Investments. Victoria's now former employer released a statement at 10 p.m. Whitfield Investments has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Victoria Ashford's employment has been terminated effective immediately. Her actions and views do not represent our company values or the character of our employees. The statement was immediately criticized. You hired her. You promoted her. You enabled her for years. Corporate PR won't save you from your culture problem. Bet you knew exactly who she was. In Rachel's hotel suite, where David had settled for the night, they worked until midnight preparing for the press conference, coordinating with legal fielding calls from board members and investors. Finally, Rachel closed her laptop. "You should sleep." "Can't," David said, staring out at Boston's skyline. "David, I keep thinking about all the times this happened before, and I couldn't do anything," he said quietly. "All the times I just had to take it, accept it, move on." Rachel stopped organizing papers. "You don't have to take it anymore." "I know, that's what scares me." "What do you mean?" David turned from the window. "Power is easy to abuse. I don't want to become the thing I'm fighting against." "You won't," Rachel said firmly, "because you're asking that question. People who abuse power never ask it." David nodded slowly, wanting to believe her. "Get some rest," Rachel said. "Tomorrow's going to be intense." The Boston Marriott conference room was packed by 9:45 a.m., every seat filled. Standing room only at the back. Cameras lined the entire rear wall, their red recording lights creating a constellation of electronic eyes. Print journalists, television crews, digital media representatives, international press, aviation industry analysts, everyone who could get credentials had shown up. At the front, a simple podium stood beneath bright lights, microphones clustered like mechanical flowers. Behind it, a clean backdrop displayed only the Vertex Aviation Holdings logo, understated, professional, powerful in its simplicity. Rachel stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the door. She'd coordinated every detail of this morning, from security to seating arrangements to the statement David would deliver. Everything had to be perfect. At exactly 10 a.m., David entered. He wore a tailored navy suit, white shirt, no tie. The look was professional but approachable. The bandage on his cheek was clean and fresh, the bruising around it now a deep purple yellow that photographs would capture clearly. He walked to the podium with measured steps, confident without swagger, present without performing. Camera flashes erupted, shutters clicked in a mechanical symphony. David waited for the noise to die down, his hands resting lightly on the podium, his expression calm and focused. When silence finally settled, he began. "Good morning. My name is David Monroe. I'm the CEO of Vertex Aviation Holdings. Thank you all for being here." He paused, looking out at the assembled media, making eye contact with individuals in the front rows. "Yesterday I was physically assaulted aboard Skybridge Airlines Flight 447 by a passenger who decided I didn't belong in first class. She was wrong about that. But this statement isn't about her. It's about the conditions that made her feel entitled to act on that belief. More camera clicks, reporters leaning forward. It's about a culture that makes people believe they have the right to police other people's existence based on how they look. That makes them comfortable enough to escalate from discomfort to harassment to violence. And that protects them from consequences until those consequences become unavoidable. I invoked a contractual clause that grounded a significant portion of Skybridge's fleet, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. When a passenger can assault another passenger in front of multiple witnesses and flight crew, and the initial response from some staff is to suggest the victim should move, the system isn't protecting people, it's protecting comfort over safety. Someone in the crowd whispered. Others nodded. "I don't want apologies from Skybridge. Apologies are words, and words are cheap when they're not backed by action. What I want is accountability, real accountability. I want policy changes that protect all passengers, not just the ones who complain the loudest or look the most comfortable. And I want genuine consequences for staff members who enable discrimination by treating it as a customer service problem instead of a safety crisis. Skybridge Airlines has contacted me requesting a meeting. I will meet with them, but not to negotiate my safety or anyone else's, to establish a new standard for the entire industry." He paused, his hands gripping the podium slightly tighter. "To the woman who hit me, I hope you get help. Real help. Because hate like that isn't born in a moment. It's cultivated over years of not being held accountable. And until you face what created it, you'll always be one bad day away from hurting someone. To everyone watching who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere, in a seat in a building, in a position, in a space you do belong. You always did. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And when they try, don't shrink to make them comfortable. Their comfort isn't your responsibility. I'll take questions now." Hands shot up across the room like a forest sprouting. David pointed to a reporter in the front row. "Yes. Jake Tapper, CNN. Mr. Monroe, will you be pressing charges?" "Yes. Both criminal and civil. The district attorney's office is handling the criminal case. My legal team is preparing civil litigation." Next question. A woman in the second row. Stephanie Rule, MSNBC. "Do you believe this incident was racially motivated?" David didn't hesitate. "I believe if I'd been white, we wouldn't be having this conversation. She wouldn't have decided I didn't belong in first class. She wouldn't have harassed me. She wouldn't have felt entitled to assault me. So yes." Another reporter standing at the back. Associated Press. "What will it take for you to lift the fleet-grounding comprehensive policy review conducted by independent auditors? Mandatory implicit bias training for all crew members administered by qualified external organizations. A passenger bill of rights that makes dignity and safety equal priorities. Independent oversight board with authority to investigate complaints. And termination of any employee who enabled or excused what happened yesterday." A voice called out without being acknowledged. "That includes the junior flight attendant who suggested you move. That includes anyone who thought relocating the victim was an appropriate response to harassment." Bloomberg News. "Mr. Monroe, How much will this cost? Skybridge? I don't know, and honestly, that's their concern, not mine. They should be more worried about the cost of maintaining a culture that puts passengers at risk. The Guardian, sir. How do you respond to critics who say you're abusing your power by grounding the airline? David leaned into the microphones, his voice firm but not angry. I'm using my power. There's a difference. Abuse would be grounding the fleet without justification. I have documented justification video evidence from multiple angles, witness testimony from multiple passengers, and a contract that explicitly permits this action when passenger safety is compromised. If someone wants to argue that assault doesn't compromise passenger safety, they're welcome to make that case. Good luck with it. But, sir, doesn't this hurt innocent passengers who are now stranded? Yes, it does. And I regret that. But you know what else hurts innocent passengers? Being harassed on flights. Being assaulted on flights. Being told they don't belong on flights they paid for. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. But inconvenience isn't violence. Delayed travel isn't assault. Missing a meeting isn't being hit in the face. Perspective matters. The room went very quiet. A young woman in the back raised her hand. David pointed to her. Thank you, USA Today. What message do you hope this sends to other airlines? David paused, considering his words carefully. That discrimination has a cost. And that cost is no longer just a settlement check quietly written to make a problem disappear. It's your reputation, your stock price, your operational capacity, your ability to function. When you tolerate discrimination, when you enable it, when you make victims responsible for solving problems they didn't create, there will be consequences, and those consequences will be proportional to the harm caused. Last question, Rachel called from the side. A black woman in the front row stood. Essence magazine. What do you want black travelers to know? David's expression softened just slightly. That you're not imagining it. That your experiences are valid. That your safety matters as much as anyone else's. And that if someone like me, with resources, with power, with legal protection, can still be targeted like this, then we have a very long way to go. But we're going. We're moving forward. And we're not going back. Applause started. Small at first, then building reporters, breaking protocol, other passengers who'd been allowed in staff at the back of the room. David nodded, once stepped away from the podium. Rachel met him at the side door. That was perfect. It was honest. That's why it was perfect. Within 15 minutes, clips were everywhere. I'm using my power. There's a difference. Inconvenience isn't violence. Discrimination has a cost. Each soundbite shared thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of times. Politicians started commenting, "This is what leadership looks like. Corporations need to listen to Mr. Monroe. Accountability matters." 2 hours after the press conference, Skybridge Airlines released their response. We have met with Mr. Monroe and his legal team. We accept full responsibility for the failures in our procedures and culture that allowed this incident to occur. Effective immediately, Skybridge Airlines commits to the following actions. All crew members will undergo mandatory implicit bias training developed and administered by external civil rights organizations. We are establishing a passenger dignity task force with independent oversight authority. We are implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination with clear public consequences. Any crew member found to have enabled discriminatory behavior will be immediately terminated. We are creating an independent passenger advocate position with authority to investigate and resolve complaints. We will publish quarterly reports on complaints, investigations, and outcomes. We apologize to Mr. Monroe for failing him. We apologize to every passenger who has ever felt unsafe or unwelcome on our aircraft. We commit to earning back trust through action, not words. The fleet will remain partially grounded until Mr. Monroe's team verifies implementation of these changes. David reviewed the statement in Rachel's hotel suite, legal team present via video call. "It's a start," he said. "Will you lift the grounding?" his general counsel asked from the screen. "Partial. 50% of the fleet can resume operations. The rest stays grounded until I see actual implementation training completed. Oversight Board established first quarterly report published. They'll push back. Let them. The contract is clear." Carmen Rodriguez received a call from Skybridge VP of Flight Operations at 2 p.m. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Susan Palmer. I've reviewed your incident report from Flight 447 in detail." Carmen tensed, expecting the worst. "Yes, your conduct throughout that flight was exemplary. You prioritized passenger safety and dignity over customer appeasement. You refused to enable discrimination. You documented everything properly. You are exactly the kind of flight attendant this airline needs." Carmen exhaled slowly. "Thank you. We're promoting you to senior flight instructor. You'll lead the development and implementation of our new training program. This is a critical position." "Are you interested?" Carmen sat down heavily on her couch at home. "Yes." "Absolutely yes." "Good. We'll need you to start immediately. The entire industry is watching us." Bradley Pierce received a very different call. "Mr. Pierce, this is HR. Your suggestion that the victim of harassment should relocate to economy class demonstrated a fundamental failure to prioritize passenger safety and dignity. Your behavior enabled discrimination. Your employment with Skybridge Airlines is terminated effective immediately." Michael Torres was being interviewed on CNN that evening, still in Boston, having delayed his return home to give his statement to prosecutors. Colonel Torres: "Some people say Mr. Monroe's response was disproportionate. What do you say to that?" "I say those people don't understand what proportionate means. A passenger was harassed for hours and then assaulted. An airline demonstrated it couldn't protect that passenger. The lessor of the aircraft used contractual authority to halt operations until safety could be guaranteed. That's not disproportionate, that's exactly proportionate. Do you think his response was about more than just this one incident?" "Of course it was. It's about every black person who's ever been told they don't belong, every person of color who's been harassed and then blamed for the harassment. Every time someone said just move or just ignore it or just let it go, Mr. Monroe said no more. That's not revenge. That's leadership." Sarah Bennett's documentary series Travel. While Black had already been greenlit by a major streaming platform based on the preliminary footage. She'd gained 2 million followers across all platforms. Her video from Flight 447 had been viewed 50 million times. In an interview with Time magazine, she was asked, "Were you scared to film?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but more scared of what would happen if I didn't. If there hadn't been video, that woman would have told her version. And without proof, people might have believed her." Documentation isn't just important, it's survival. Thomas Grant wrote an op-ed that ran in the Boston Globe and was immediately picked up nationally. "I am a 70-year-old white man. I have never been told I don't belong somewhere based on my appearance. I have never had to prove my right to occupy a space I paid to occupy. What I witnessed on Flight 447 was a masterclass in restraint that I'm not certain I would be capable of." Mr. Monroe could have responded to being hit with violence of his own. Most people would have. Instead, he responded with precision. He used the tools available to him not to destroy, but to demand change. He showed us that true strength isn't about domination. It's about dignity maintained under pressure that would break most people. And he reminded us that accountability isn't the opposite of grace. Sometimes accountability is grace. Within 48 hours, every major airline announced policy reviews. Delta comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all employees. Mandatory quarterly refreshers, independent oversight. United new passenger protection protocols, anonymous complaint system, public transparency reports. American Zero Tolerance Enforcement updates Passenger Bill of Rights crew accountability measures. Southwest Enhanced Training Programs dedicated passenger safety advocates quarterly audits. It was an industry-wide reckoning, and it had started with one phone call at 38,000 feet. 6 weeks later, Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety, that particular scent that courtrooms develop over decades of cases, confessions, judgments. Victoria sat at the defense table in a conservative gray suit her mother had purchased specifically for trial hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older and somehow smaller than she had on that flight. Her attorney, expensive, hired after her parents mortgaged their Connecticut home, sat beside her with a leather portfolio and an expression that suggested he knew they were fighting uphill with broken legs. The gallery was packed. Media in the back rows, sketch artists, poised activists from various civil rights organizations watching with intense focus. Every seat taken, people standing at the sides where court officers allowed it. David sat in the second row behind the prosecution table, Rachel beside him taking notes. He wore another simple suit, the bruise on his face now faded but still visible enough to remind everyone why they were there. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the gate supervisor, stood to deliver opening statements. She was 42, sharp, black woman who'd built her career on cases other prosecutors considered too difficult or too controversial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is fundamentally simple. She began pacing slowly. The defendant, Victoria Ashford, harassed a fellow passenger from the moment she encountered him in the airport lounge. She escalated that harassment throughout a flight, and when he refused to be intimidated, when he simply stood up at his own seat, she struck him in the face. You will see video evidence from multiple angles. You will hear testimony from multiple witnesses. You will see the injury. This isn't complicated. It's about whether we tolerate violence when someone's presence makes us uncomfortable. Victoria's attorney, Robert Brennan, no relation to the Airline CEO, stood for his opening statement. The defense does not dispute that Ms. Ashford made contact with Mr. Monroe. But ladies and gentlemen, we will show you that she felt genuinely threatened. That she perceived danger, whether that perception was objectively reasonable or not. That in a moment of fear she reacted defensively. Context matters. Intent matters. We ask that you consider the full picture, not just a few seconds of video. The prosecution's case built methodically. Witness 1. Carmen Rodriguez. Carmen took the stand wearing her flight attendant uniform, having come directly from a training session where she was teaching the new protocols her airline had implemented. Ms. Rodriguez, please describe your observations of the defendant's behavior. The defendant began harassing Mr. Monroe in the airport lounge. Before we even boarded, Carmen said, her voice steady and professional. Once on the aircraft, she complained repeatedly about his presence, made false accusations, and progressively escalated her behavior. The harassment was continuous and deliberate. Did Mr. Monroe do anything that could be construed as threatening? Nothing. He was remarkably calm throughout the entire incident. Cross-examination. Ms. Rodriguez, my client, claims she felt threatened when Mr. Monroe stood up suddenly. Isn't it reasonable for a woman to feel intimidated by a large man standing? He didn't stand suddenly. He stood normally at his own seat, and your client had been harassing him for hours at that point. She wasn't threatened. She was frustrated that he wouldn't submit to her harassment. Objection. Speculation. Sustained. Ms. Rodriguez, please stick to what you observed. Fine. I observed her targeting him from the beginning. I observed her making false accusations. I observed her escalating at every opportunity. Then I observed her hitting him. Those are my observations. Witness 2. Michael Torres. Colonel Torres. What did you observe during the flight? I observed systematic harassment of a passenger by another passenger. Michael said, his military bearing evident in his posture and delivery. The defendant made it clear from the beginning that she didn't want Mr. Monroe near her. When he remained calm and didn't react, she escalated. When he still didn't give her a justification to call him aggressive, she created one by hitting him. "Did you see Mr. Monroe do anything aggressive?" "No. I've been in combat. I know what aggression looks like." He was sitting quietly reading a book. "That's not aggression." "Cross-examination. Colonel, you're a large man yourself. Don't you think someone might find it intimidating if you stood up suddenly?" "Sure, if I stood up suddenly in someone's face. But that's not what happened. He stood up at his own seat after hours of harassment. That's not intimidation, that's standing your ground." Witness 3. Sarah Bennett. "Ms. Bennett, you filmed portions of the incident." "Why?" "Because I recognized what I was seeing. I've documented discrimination before. I knew if there wasn't video, his version wouldn't matter. Only hers would." The prosecution played Sarah's videos on screens throughout the courtroom, multiple angles showing Victoria's escalating aggression, the false accusation, the slap itself, crystal clear, undeniable. Gasps from the gallery. Victoria closed her eyes. "Ms. Bennett, in your observation, did Mr. Monroe provoke this assault? No, he existed. That's what he did. He existed in a space she decided he didn't belong in." Witness 4. Thomas Grant. "Professor Grant, you have expertise in sociology and discrimination. I taught those subjects for 40 years at Boston University. What did you observe on Flight 447? Thomas looked directly at the jury. "I observed textbook discriminatory behavior. Targeting based on appearance. Escalation when the target refused to comply with subordination. False accusations designed to paint the victim as the aggressor. And finally violence when all other methods of control failed. I've taught these patterns. I never thought I'd witness them so clearly in person." "Do you believe race was a factor?" Objection. I'll rephrase. Did the defendant's behavior fit patterns of racial discrimination? Thomas nodded slowly. "Every single pattern. David's testimony came late in the second day. He walked to the stand, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth." "Mr. Monroe, please describe what happened from your perspective." David spoke for 20 minutes, calmly and chronologically. The lounge encounter, the boarding confrontation, the in-flight harassment, the escalation, the assault. And when you stood up, what was your intention to be at eye level for a conversation? She was leaning down at me, invading my space. I stood so we could speak as equals. Did you say anything threatening? I told her I belong everywhere I choose to be, that no one gets to tell me otherwise. And then she hit me. How did that make you feel? David paused, considering. Disappointed. Disappointed. That in 2024 this is still something people have to experience. That no amount of education or success or achievement makes you immune to being targeted for how you look. Cross-examination by Brennan. Mr. Monroe. You're a wealthy man, correct. I'm financially comfortable. You own a company worth billions. Vertex Aviation Holdings has significant assets, yes? And when you grounded Skybridge Airlines, you were using your wealth as a weapon against my client, weren't you? I was using a contractual clause to address a safety failure. That's not a weapon. That's a contract. But you punished thousands of innocent passengers. The airline's failure to protect passengers created that situation. I simply enforced consequences that were already agreed to in our lease. Isn't it true that you could have simply moved seats and avoided this entire situation? David looked at Brennan for a long moment. I could have. But why should I? I paid for my seat. I wasn't bothering anyone. She decided I didn't belong based on how I look. That's not my problem to solve by accommodating discrimination. But if you'd just moved... If I'd moved, I'd be teaching her and everyone like her that harassment works. that if you make someone uncomfortable enough, they'll do what you want. I won't do that. I didn't do it then. I won't do it now. Victoria's testimony was the defense's only real hope. She took the stand wearing the same gray suit, hands trembling slightly as she swore the oath. Ms. Ashford, please tell the jury what happened from your perspective. Victoria's voice shook. I was uncomfortable from the moment I saw him in the lounge. Why, he was large, wearing casual clothes. He looked out of place. What about that made you uncomfortable? Victoria hesitated, caught in the trap her attorney should have seen coming. Any honest answer would sound explicitly racist. Any vague answer would sound like lying. I've been taught to be aware of my surroundings, to trust my instincts about safety. Were there other large men on that flight? Silence. Ms. Ashford. Yes. Did you complain about them? No. Why not? It was different. How was it different? Victoria couldn't answer. Cross-examination was surgical. Ms. Ashford, you claim you felt unsafe, but you never asked to change seats until after you saw Mr. Monroe, correct? Yes. You didn't complain about the captain, a large Hispanic man. You didn't complain about Colonel Torres, a large white man. Only Mr. Monroe. The situation was different. How, I don't know. I just felt uncomfortable. You posted on LinkedIn during the flight calling Mr. Monroe aggressive, but video shows he never moved aggressively. Were you lying? I was expressing my perception. Were you lying? Ms. Ashford? I was mistaken. Or were you creating a narrative to justify behavior you knew was wrong? Victoria's attorney objected, sustained. But the jury had heard the question. Closing arguments. Prosecution. This case is simple. The defendant harassed, escalated, and assaulted. Video doesn't lie. Witnesses don't lie. Only the defendant has lied about being touched, about being threatened, about her motivations. Find her guilty of what she clearly did. Defense. My client made a terrible mistake in a moment of fear. She's lost her job, her reputation, her future. She's been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. Hasn't she been punished enough? The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned at 4:47 p.m. on the third day. On the charge of assault and battery, how do you find guilty? Victoria's face crumpled. Her mother, sitting behind her, began crying. On the charge of interfering with flight operations, guilty. On the charge of creating a disturbance aboard an aircraft, guilty. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Judge Morrison had a reputation for thoughtful sentences. Not harsh for the sake of being harsh, not lenient for the sake of mercy. Proportional, considered. The kind of judge both prosecutors and defense attorneys respected even when they disagreed with her rulings. Victoria stood before her, now hands clasped in front of her gray suit shoulders, hunched in a way that made her look defeated before the sentence was even pronounced. Ms. Ashford, Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying through the courtroom without being raised. You've been found guilty on all counts. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say? Victoria nodded, her lawyer having prepared her for this moment. Your Honor, I want to say that I'm deeply sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I acted out of fear and stress, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I've lost my career, my reputation, everything I worked for. I just want a chance to move forward and learn from this. Judge Morrison studied her for a long moment. Ms. Ashford, I've read the trial transcripts carefully. I've watched the videos. I've reviewed the witness statements. And I noticed something about your apology just now. You're sorry for what this cost you. Your career. Your reputation. But I hear very little acknowledgement of what you did to Mr. Monroe, of the hours of harassment, of the fear you tried to create, of the violence you inflicted. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. You assaulted a man because his presence made you uncomfortable. You lied repeatedly to justify that assault. You used your privilege and status as weapons. And even now in your apology, you seem more concerned with your consequences than with his experience. Judge Morrison paused, letting the words settle. This court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison to be followed by 2 years of supervised probation. During probation, you will undergo mandatory counseling focused on racial bias and anger management. You will perform 500 hours of community service with organizations that combat discrimination. You will pay restitution to Mr. Monroe in the amount of $250,000 to cover legal fees, medical expenses, and general damages. Victoria swayed slightly. Her lawyer steadied her. Additionally, you are permanently banned from flying on Skybridge Airlines and any airline that operates under Vertex Aviation Holdings lease agreements. This is a matter of passenger safety. The gavel struck. This court is adjourned. Victoria began crying in earnest as court officers approached to take her into custody. Outside the courthouse, David stood before a smaller gathering of press. Mr. Monroe, are you satisfied with the sentence? Justice was served according to the law. That's what matters. Do you think 18 months is enough? That's for the court to decide, not me. What matters is that she was held accountable and that accountability was public. That sends a message. Will this change anything? David looked directly at the camera. It already has. Airlines are implementing new policies. Crew members are being trained differently. Passengers are being protected better. That's the real victory. Carmen Rodriguez, promoted to senior flight instructor, stood in front of 400 flight attendants at Skybridge's training center in Atlanta. My name is Carmen Rodriguez. 2 months ago, I was a senior flight attendant on a routine flight to London. Today, I'm teaching you protocols that I wish had existed then. She clicked to a slide showing David's face-bandaged cheek prominently displayed. This man was assaulted on my watch. And before that assault, there were a dozen moments where it could have been stopped, where someone could have intervened more effectively, where policy could have protected him. I'm here to make sure you recognize those moments and know exactly what to do. The room was silent, attentive. Because if we'd been properly trained, if we'd had clear protocols, if we'd prioritized safety over comfort, Mr. Monroe wouldn't have been hit. He would have just flown to London. And that's what we owe every single passenger. Bradley Pierce, the junior flight attendant who'd suggested David move to economy, scrolled through job listings for the 73rd time that month. Every airline application had the same question. Have you ever been terminated from a position? He had to check yes. Most applications were rejected before he even got to an interview. The few interviews he did get ended when they Googled his name and found the articles, the references to his complicity, his failure to protect a passenger. He'd thought he was being helpful. He'd thought de-escalation meant making the uncomfortable passenger comfortable. He understood now that he'd made the victim responsible for solving a problem the victim didn't create. It was a lesson that cost him his career. Michael Torres received a package from Vertex Aviation Holdings. Inside, a platinum card embossed with his name. The letter read, Dear Colonel Torres, thank you for speaking up when it mattered. Your willingness to stand as a witness to truth reminds us that allies are made through action, not just words. As a token of our appreciation, please accept lifetime platinum status on all Vertex-affiliated airlines. May you never encounter discrimination on your travels, and may you continue to speak up when you witness it. Respectfully, David Monroe. Michael called his wife, voice thick with emotion. He sent me lifetime platinum. For what she asked. For doing what anyone should do, telling the truth. Victoria was processed into federal prison at Danbury, Connecticut, 3 days after sentencing. She exchanged her gray suit for a gray uniform, her expensive haircut for a prison regulation style, her jewelry for nothing. She was photographed, fingerprinted, cataloged. assigned a cell, a number, a schedule. The first night she lay on the thin mattress staring at the underside of the bunk above her, listening to the sounds of the prison settling into darkness. She'd lost everything. Not because of one moment, though, that's how she'd tried to frame it in her mind. Because of every choice that led to that moment. Every time she'd seen someone and decided they didn't belong. Every time she'd used her status to make someone smaller. Every time she'd confused privilege with power and power with righteousness. Her cellmate, an older black woman named Dorothy, who'd been inside for 2 years on embezzlement charges, had watched Victoria arrive with the knowing look of someone who'd seen countless people enter prison, thinking they were different from everyone else there. "You gonna make it?" Dorothy asked into the darkness. "I don't know," Victoria whispered honestly. "That's a start," Dorothy said. "Most folks come in here still thinking they didn't do nothing wrong. You know you did something. Maybe you'll figure out what it was." Victoria didn't answer, but she thought about it as sleep finally came. What had she done? Not just the slap. What had she done before that and before that and before that? How many small moments of cruelty had led to one large act of violence? She'd have 18 months to figure it out. Vertex Aviation Holdings, headquarters. Manhattan, 6 months after Flight 447. David sat in his office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his desk. Rachel entered with her tablet, now a familiar ritual of updates and decisions that shaped an industry. "Quarterly report from Skybridge," she said, pulling up the data. David took the tablet, scrolled through the metrics. Passenger satisfaction. Up 34%. Discrimination complaints. Down 89%. Staff retention. Up 21%. Stock price. Fully recovered. Actually up 7% from pre-incident levels. Industry rankings moved from 7th to 2nd in customer trust. They actually did it. David said quietly, something like surprise in his voice. "They didn't have a choice," Rachel replied. "You gave them consequences or transformation." "They chose transformation." "No," David said, still reading. "They could have done the minimum to get the fleet back. They didn't. Look at this. They exceeded the training requirements. The oversight board has more authority than we required. They're actually trying." Rachel smiled. "Imagine that. Companies doing better when being better becomes profitable." At Skybridge headquarters in Atlanta, CEO Thomas Brennan stood before the board of directors with numbers that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "6 months ago, we faced an existential crisis." He said, the memory of those dark days still evident in his voice. "Today, we're the industry leader in passenger protection and satisfaction." He clicked through slides showing the Transformation Passenger Advocate Program, 100% implementation, 94% positive feedback, zero tolerance enforcement, 47 staff members terminated for bias violations, clear message sent, implicit bias training completed for all, crew quarterly refreshers scheduled. Anonymous complaint system. 1,247 reports filed, 1,190 resolved. Full transparency. Independent oversight. Board operational publishing monthly reports. "We're also profitable again," the CFO added. "Revenue is up. Costs from the grounding were significant, but customer loyalty has more than compensated. Turns out treating people with dignity is excellent business." A board member spoke up. "What's the industry doing?" "Following us," Brennan said. "Every major carrier has implemented similar programs. The FAA is making some of our protocols recommended standards. We didn't just save our airline, we changed aviation." Carmen Rodriguez's training program had become the gold standard. Other airlines were licensing her curriculum. The FAA had invited her to advise on federal guidelines. She'd been profiled in Aviation Week Time magazine and Essence. But the moment that meant the most came during a training session when a young black flight attendant approached her afterward. "Ms. Rodriguez, I just want to thank you. I've been flying for 3 years and I've seen things. Passengers being harassed, being told they don't belong. And I never knew what to do because the old training just said to de-escalate. Your program teaches us to protect people, actually protect them. Thank you for that." Carmen hugged her. "Thank you for caring enough to learn." Delta launched Project Dignity comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols developed with input from civil rights organizations. United created a passenger rights task force with representatives from advocacy groups, customers, and crew members. American implemented real-time monitoring systems that flagged potential discrimination incidents and triggered immediate supervisor intervention. Southwest updated their Passenger Bill of Rights to explicitly include protection from discrimination with enforceable penalties. Every major carrier made changes. Because they'd seen what happened to Skybridge when they didn't. Because David Monroe had shown them that accountability wasn't theoretical. It was contractual, it was enforceable, and it was expensive. Harvard Business School developed a case study, Flight 447, When Accountability Transforms Industry. Stanford Law School analyzed the contractual implications in seminars attended by corporate attorneys from every major airline. UCLA's Anderson School of Management studied the stock market response publishing papers on how rapid cultural transformation could actually increase shareholder value. "This case will be taught for decades," one professor told his class. "Not just for what happened, but for how it was handled. One person using existing systems properly changed an entire industry. That's power." Sarah Bennett's documentary Travel While Black had become a streaming phenomenon. Episode 1 featured interviews with David, Carmen, Michael, and Thomas, interwoven with the footage from Flight 447. Episode 2 compiled stories from dozens of black travelers sharing similar experiences. Different planes, different airlines, same patterns of discrimination. Episode 3 documented the airline industry's response and transformation, showing training sessions, policy implementations, and interviews with executives who admitted their previous approaches had been insufficient. Episode 4, released 6 months after the incident, focused on ongoing challenges and the work still needed. The series won a Webby Award, a Peabody nomination, and a distribution deal that made it required viewing in several corporate diversity training programs. Sarah had leveraged viral video into meaningful change. Michael Torres had become an unlikely advocate. He spoke at veteran organizations about implicit bias and how service to country meant protecting everyone's dignity, not just some people's. "I served 20 years defending freedom," he told an audience at Fort Bragg. "But freedom means nothing if some people are free and others have to earn it. When I stood up on that plane, I wasn't being brave. I was doing the minimum required of a decent person. We should all be doing that minimum." Standing ovations, requests for more speaking engagements from military bases, corporate events, university campuses. He accepted them all, always refusing payment, always directing any honorarium to civil rights organizations. Thomas Grant had donated his retirement savings, nearly $500,000 accumulated over 40 years of teaching, to organizations fighting discrimination. "I'm 70 years old," he told his children who'd questioned whether he should give away so much. "I don't need the money. But this work needs resources. David Monroe showed us what's possible when people have the means to fight back. I want to help provide those means." His op-ed about Flight 447 was anthologized in a collection about modern civil rights movements. At the book launch, he met David for the first time since the trial. "Thank you for being there," David said. "Thank you for showing us how it's done," Thomas replied. "Dignity under pressure. That's a lesson worth learning at any age." David expanded Vertex Aviation Holdings operations, but he also created something new, The David Monroe Foundation. Mission statement: provide legal defense funding and advocacy for individuals facing discrimination. First-year funding $50 million from David's personal assets. Cases taken 247 cases, won 241. Success rate 97.6%. The foundation provided attorneys, expert witnesses, and financial support for people who couldn't afford to fight back alone. A lot of people face what I faced, David told the board at the foundation's first annual meeting. But they can't afford lawyers. They can't risk losing their jobs. They can't weather the storm of fighting back. This foundation fights for them. Rachel had been promoted to VP of Operations at Vertex at age 32. Forbes featured her in their 30 under 30 list. In the interview, she was asked about David's leadership. He leads by example, she said, not by demanding respect, but by embodying dignity. He showed an entire industry that accountability isn't optional. That's rare. That matters. David visited his mother in their old Baltimore neighborhood 6 months after the incident. She'd watched every news report, read every article, cried through the trial coverage. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said, touching his face where the bruise had finally faded completely. "I just did what you taught me, Mama. Keep your head up. Stand your ground. Do what's right even when it's hard. You did more than that," she said. "You changed things. For all of us." David was invited to speak at the NAACP convention at a congressional hearing on airline passenger rights at corporate diversity conferences across the country. He accepted selectively careful not to let speaking about change replace actually creating it. When he did speak, he kept it simple. Dignity isn't negotiable, respect isn't optional, and accountability isn't revenge. It's how we move forward. You don't have to be wealthy to demand dignity. You don't have to be powerful to expect respect. You just have to refuse to accept less than you deserve. The audiences responded with standing ovations. But the responses that mattered most came in emails and letters from people who'd faced discrimination and, inspired by Flight 447, had chosen to stand their ground instead of shrinking to make others comfortable. Those letters David kept in a folder on his desk, reminders that one person standing firm could give others permission to do the same. 18 months later, Danbury Federal Prison released Victoria Ashford at 7 a.m. on a cold November morning. She walked out wearing donated clothes, jeans, and a sweatshirt from the prison release program, carrying a small bag with her few possessions. Her mother waited by an old Honda Civic engine running against the morning chill. They didn't hug, just looked at each other for a long moment. "Hi, Mom. Let's go home." They drove for 30 minutes in silence before her mother finally spoke. "What now?" Victoria stared out the window at the passing landscape. "I don't know." Back at her mother's house, the house Victoria had grown up in before college and career and the life she'd built and lost, Victoria faced her new reality. Criminal record assault conviction visible to any background check, employment prospects, effectively zero in finance or any corporate role. Social circle vanished. Friends had stopped returning calls within a week of the arrest. Relationship status: single, no prospects, no one interested in someone whose face was synonymous with racism. Financial status: broke. The settlement payment had taken everything she'd saved. Her parents' mortgage had paid for her legal defense. She sat on her childhood bed staring at wallpaper she hadn't seen in 15 years and understood that this was her life now. She applied to 73 jobs over 2 months. Retail positions, food service, administrative roles, anything that didn't require significant background checks. 16 interviews, 0 offers. One hiring manager had been honest. "Look, I'm sorry, but I Googled you. I can't hire you. My staff is diverse. Your presence would create significant problems." Victoria nodded. She understood. Didn't agree entirely, but understood. Her court-ordered therapy sessions happened every Tuesday afternoon at a community counseling center in Norwalk. Dr. Patricia Williams, 62, black woman, no-nonsense demeanor that made it clear she'd heard every excuse and wouldn't accept any. "Tell me what you've learned," Dr. Williams said during their 10th session. "That I was wrong. Be specific." Victoria took a breath. "I judged someone based on appearance. I felt entitled to comfort at the expense of his dignity. I escalated when he wouldn't submit to my harassment. I lied to protect myself. I responded with violence when I lost control." "Good. Now tell me why." Victoria struggled with this one. It was the question she'd been avoiding even in her own thoughts. I think I was raised to believe certain spaces belonged to me, that I had a right to comfort that superseded other people's right to exist, that my feelings were more important than someone else's safety. And now I know those beliefs were poison, that they hurt people, that they hurt me, that the world I thought I understood was built on the premise that I mattered more than people who looked different from me. Dr. Williams nodded slowly. "You're getting there. But knowing isn't enough. What are you doing about it?" "My community service," Victoria said. "I'm working at a food bank in Bridgeport, predominantly black community. I stock shelves, sort donations, clean. I don't speak unless spoken to." "Why not speak?" "Because I need to listen. I've spent my whole life talking, asserting, demanding. I need to learn to be quiet and pay attention." One day at the food bank, an elderly black woman stopped Victoria while she was sorting canned goods. "You're that woman from the plane." Victoria froze. She'd been recognized a few times, usually resulting in cold stares or muttered comments. "Yes, ma'am." The woman studied her for a long moment. "You sorry?" "Every day. Sorry you got caught, or sorry you did it?" Victoria met her eyes. "Both. But more the second one. And I'm working on making the sorry mean something instead of just saying it." The woman nodded slowly. "Keep working. Maybe you'll figure it out." 3 months after her release, Victoria was shopping for groceries when she turned a corner and froze. Carmen Rodriguez stood in the same aisle comparing pasta brands. Their eyes met. Carmen's expression hardened immediately. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. What could she possibly say? Finally, "I'm sorry." Carmen said nothing. "I don't expect you to accept it," Victoria continued, words tumbling out faster now. "But I need to say it. I'm sorry for what I did to Mr. Monroe, for what you had to witness, for putting you in that position, for everything." Carmen studied her for a long moment, really looking at her. The cheap clothes, the lack of makeup, the weight of consequences visible in every line of her face. "Are you sorry you hit him? Or sorry you got caught?" "Both," Victoria said honestly. "But I'm working on being more the first one than the second one." Carmen nodded once. "Keep working." She walked away without another word. Victoria stood there for 5 minutes afterward, shaking tears running down her face in the middle of the grocery store, not caring who saw. Her social media presence had been destroyed beyond repair. Her Wikipedia page existed, would exist forever. A permanent record of the worst moment of her life. Every few months, someone would resurface the video. Remember this? Tweets would go viral again, and Victoria would spend days seeing her name trending, reading comments about what a terrible person she was. She deleted all her accounts, created no new ones. She couldn't control the narrative. She could only control what she did next. 6 months after release, Victoria found work at a nonprofit called Second Chances that helped formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. The director, a woman named Alicia, who'd served 5 years for drug charges, interviewed her carefully. "Why do you want this job?" "Because I understand what it's like to lose everything," Victoria said. "To have to rebuild from nothing. To know that people will always see your worst moment first. You understand you'd be working with primarily women of color, I understand. And I hope that maybe in some small way I can help, or at least not hurt. She was hired at $18 an hour. She'd made $185,000 at Whitfield Investments. But this job felt more real. Victoria wrote a letter to David that she revised 17 times and never sent Mr. Monroe. I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the space to apologize. But I need you to know that I understand now what I couldn't see then. You weren't the problem. I was. You were sitting in a seat you paid for. I decided that wasn't acceptable. Not because of anything you did, but because of what I'd been taught to believe about who deserves what. I'm working on becoming someone different, someone better, someone who sees people as people, not as threats to my comfort. I'll be paying my debt to you, financial and moral, for the rest of my life. And I accept that. Thank you for holding me accountable. I needed it. I deserved it. Victoria Ashford. She folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Some apologies weren't meant to reach their target. They were meant to mark the distance traveled. 2 years after Flight 447. David boarded a Skybridge flight to London. Same route. Same first-class cabin. Same seat 2A. But everything was different. The gate agent recognized him, smiled warmly. Welcome aboard, Mr. Monroe. It's an honor to have you flying with us today. Other passengers in the lounge had approached him, not intrusively, just brief acknowledgments. Thank you for what you did. My daughter feels safer traveling because of you. You changed things. Thank you. The flight attendant greeting passengers was a young black woman who looked at David with barely concealed emotion. Mr. Monroe, she said quietly, I just want you to know I got this job because of the changes your case created. The old hiring practices wouldn't have given me a chance. So, thank you. David shook her hand. Thank you for being here. This industry needs you. The flight was smooth, peaceful, uneventful, the way it should have been the first time. Carmen Rodriguez was featured in Aviation Week's People of the Year issue. In the interview, she was asked, Do you think things have really changed? Yes, Carmen said without hesitation. Not everywhere. Not completely. Not permanently unless we stay vigilant. But, yes, I see it in training sessions, in how crew members handle situations, in how passengers treat each other. One person stood up literally and figuratively and refused to accept business as usual. That created space for all of us to demand better. The Monroe Protocols, as they'd become informally known, were adopted by the International Civil Aviation Organization as recommended standards for member nations. The FAA made them official guidelines for U.S. carriers. The European Aviation Safety Agency incorporated them into their safety management systems. What started on one flight became industry standard worldwide. Sarah Bennett's documentary series expanded. Season 2, Travel While Muslim, documenting discrimination against Muslim travelers post 9/11 and ongoing. Season 3, Travel While Disabled, examining accessibility failures and discrimination against passengers with disabilities. Season 4, Travel While Trans, exploring challenges faced by transgender travelers. Each season ended with David appearing to offer perspective. This isn't about me, he told Sarah during Season 4 filming. It never was. It's about what happens when we finally decide that dignity isn't negotiable, when we decide that making someone comfortable at the expense of someone else's humanity isn't acceptable. That's not my achievement. That's all of us choosing to be better. Michael Torres's leadership course on implicit bias became mandatory at West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. You can't lead people you don't see as fully human, he told a classroom of cadets. And you can't see people as fully human if you're carrying unexamined bias. Mr. Monroe showed us what leadership looks like, not commanding authority through rank, but earning respect through character. Not demanding others change, but refusing to accept unacceptable conditions. That's the leadership we need. Thomas Grant, now 73, established a scholarship fund, the David Monroe Scholarship for Excellence in Aviation, for students of color pursuing careers in aviation, pilots, engineers, executives, anyone working to change an industry from the inside. The industry needs more people like David, he told potential donors. Not because of what he owns, but because of how he carries himself, because of his refusal to shrink, because he understands that power unused in service of justice isn't power, it's privilege wasted. First year, 12 recipients. By year 3, 47 students across multiple universities. The David Monroe Foundation continued expanding. Year 1, 247 cases. Year 2, 891 cases. Year 3, 2,140 cases. Success rate remained above 95%. We're not just winning cases, David told the Foundation's board. We're changing precedent. Every case we win makes it easier for the next person to stand up. Every victory tells someone else that they don't have to accept being diminished. Rachel Kim became COO of Vertex Aviation Holdings at 33. Forbes featured her in 30 Under 30. Fortune profiled her leadership style. In every interview, she was asked about David. He taught me that real power is quiet, she said. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just acts. And it acts in service of something bigger than itself. Victoria, now 40, had rebuilt a small life. She'd been promoted to program coordinator at Second Chances. She sponsored 5 women through their reintegration, helping them find housing employment counseling. She attended therapy every week, still, even though it was no longer court-mandated. She volunteered at a church in New Haven, serving meals, organizing donations, doing the quiet work of service without expectation of recognition. She would never be redeemed in the public eye. Her name would always be synonymous with that moment. But privately, slowly, she was becoming someone she could live with. One evening, she received an envelope at the non-profit's office. Inside a check for $25,000, made out to Second Chances, from the David Monroe Foundation. Note attached in precise handwriting. For the work you're doing now. Keep going. Victoria sat down hard, the check trembling in her hands. She would never cash it for personal use, but she deposited it into the non-profit's account, and she framed the note. Not as forgiveness, she knew she hadn't earned that and might never, but as acknowledgement that change, when real, is visible even to those you've harmed. Congress passed the Airline Passenger Dignity Act 2 years after Flight 447. Federal protections against discrimination in commercial aviation. Enforceable penalties with real teeth. Mandatory training standards across all carriers. Independent oversight requirements. David was invited to the signing ceremony at the White House. He stood behind the president as the law was signed, cameras flashing, history being made. "This doesn't happen without you," the president said quietly before the official photo. "This doesn't happen without everyone who stood up," David replied. Carmen, Michael, Sarah, Thomas. Every person who refused to be a bystander. That's what made this possible. Skybridge Airlines became the most trusted brand in aviation. Customer loyalty scores. Highest in industry. Employee satisfaction. Highest in industry. Profitability. Record-breaking stock value. Up 34% from pre-incident levels. CEO Thomas Brennan was asked at a shareholders meeting, was the transformation worth the cost? "The transformation saved the company," Brennan said. "The incident just forced our hand. We should have done this decades ago. Mr. Monroe didn't destroy us. He gave us a chance to become what we should have always been. On the 2-year anniversary of Flight 447, David sat in his office with Rachel. She'd brought him something, the original bandage from that day, now framed with a simple plaque. "Thought you might want this," she said. David looked at it, a small piece of gauze and medical tape stained with blood that had long since dried brown, a reminder of a moment that changed everything. "You know what's funny?" he said. "I didn't want this fight. No one ever does. I just wanted to fly to London, read my book, do my meeting, come home. And now I'm glad it happened." He saw Rachel's expression and clarified. "Not the assault, I'll never be glad about that. But what came after? The accountability, the change. The fact that maybe, just maybe, the next person who looks like me won't have to experience what I did. You did that. We did that," David corrected. "All of us. Everyone who refused to look away. That's what matters." He looked at the framed bandage, then at Rachel. "You ready for London? Flight leaves in 3 hours. Same flight, same seat, different world." They gathered their things and headed to the airport, where a plane waited to take them somewhere 6,000 miles away. And this time, David Monroe would just be a passenger reading a book, the way it always should have been. 6 months later, David received an invitation to speak at a small community center in Brooklyn. Not a major venue, no cameras, just 60 people, mostly families from the neighborhood, mostly black and brown faces, mostly people who'd lived the same experiences David had, but without the resources to fight back. He almost declined. He'd been doing fewer speaking engagements, trying to return to the quiet work of running his company, living his life. Rachel convinced him. These are the people who matter most, the ones who don't have platforms, who don't get heard. Go. So he went. The community center was modest, worn floors, fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged in rows. A simple podium at the front with a microphone that crackled when you stood too close. David approached the podium and looked out at the faces watching him. Hopeful, tired, familiar. "Thank you for inviting me. I'll keep this brief. 2.5 years ago, I was assaulted on a plane for sitting in a seat I paid for. You probably heard about it. It was everywhere for a while." Knowing nods around the room. "What you might not know is that I didn't do anything special. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know it would blow up the way it did. I just refused to accept being treated as less than. That's it. And that shouldn't be revolutionary. But here we are. A lot of people called me brave afterward, but I wasn't brave. I was tired. Tired of proving I belong, tired of being patient, tired of letting it go for the sake of keeping peace. So I didn't let it go. And that's being called brave, which tells you how low the bar is." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "Here's what I want you to know. You don't have to be wealthy to demand dignity. You don't have to own planes to expect respect. You don't have to be famous to matter. You just have to refuse to shrink. Because when we make ourselves smaller to make others comfortable, we're not keeping peace. We're teaching them that making us smaller works. I'm not saying be aggressive. I'm not saying start fights. I'm saying be unmovable in your right to exist fully. Stand in your space. Occupy your seat. Be present without apology. And when they come for you, because they will come, don't back down. Not because you'll always win, but because your dignity isn't negotiable." A young black woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. "Mr. Monroe, I work in corporate finance. I'm one of 3 black people in my office. Every day someone questions whether I belong. Someone asks if I'm lost. Someone checks my credentials when they don't check anyone else's. What do I do?" David looked at her, seeing himself 20 years ago. "Say it out loud right now. I belong." She hesitated. "I belong." Louder. "I belong." Again. "Like you mean it. I belong." Her voice rang through the room. Applause erupted. People stood. She was crying and smiling at the same time. "Good," David said. "Now say that to yourself every morning. And when someone asks if you're lost, look them in the eye and say, 'No. Are you?'" More applause, louder now. "One last thing," David said, his voice softening. The room quieted. "The woman who hit me, she's not a monster. She's a product of a belief that taught her she mattered more than I did, that her comfort was more important than my humanity. I don't say that to excuse her. I say it because she's not unique. That belief is everywhere. In every industry, every institution, every interaction where someone decides who belongs and who doesn't. So changing things means more than punishing one person. It means dismantling the belief itself. And that's exhausting work. It's daily work. It never ends. But it's the only work that matters." He paused. "So do that work. Not because I did, but because you're worth it. You've always been worth it. They're just finally starting to notice." After the event, people lined up to shake his hand, share their stories, thank him for coming. A young boy, maybe 9, approached with his father. "Mr. Monroe, my dad says you're a hero." David crouched down to eye level. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to move when I was told to. And you can do that too. Really, really. You belong everywhere you choose to be. Remember that. Always." The boy nodded seriously, like he was accepting a sacred trust. David stood, shook the father's hand, and walked out into the Brooklyn evening. Rachel waited by the car. "How was it?" "It was real," David said. "Small room, real people, honest conversation. What's next?" David looked up at the sky. Planes crossed overhead, their lights blinking in the darkness, carrying people to destinations all over the world. "More of this," he said. "More small rooms, more real conversations. One person at a time, not as glamorous as boardrooms and press conferences." "No." David smiled. "But it matters more." He got in the car. As they drove away, he thought about that flight 2 years ago. He wouldn't wish it on anyone, but he wouldn't undo it either, because it had proven something he'd always known, but the world needed reminding: that silence protects the wrong people, that patience has limits, that dignity demands defense, and that one person refusing to move can change everything, not through strength, through truth. So here we are, the end of David's story. But is it really the end? Look, I share a lot of stories on this channel. Stories about justice, about standing up, about consequences, finally catching up with people who thought they were untouchable. But this one is different. Because David didn't win by being louder. He didn't win by fighting fire with fire. He didn't win by getting revenge. He won by refusing to move. When Victoria told him he didn't belong, he stayed. When she harassed him for hours, he stayed calm. When she hit him, he made one phone call. And that phone call changed an entire industry. What can we learn from this? First, your dignity is not up for debate. David didn't ask permission to sit in first class. He didn't justify his presence. He didn't explain himself. He just existed there. And that was enough, because it should always be enough. You don't owe anyone an explanation for occupying space you've earned or honestly space you haven't earned. You don't owe anyone comfort at the expense of your humanity. Second, consequences. Teach what conversations can't. David could have filed a complaint, written a letter, waited for the airline to investigate. Would it have mattered? Maybe. Probably not. Instead, he used the power available to him, a contract clause, and held an entire airline accountable in real time. That's not revenge. That's enforcement. And enforcement works when words don't. Third, standing up doesn't mean standing alone. Remember Carmen Michael, Sarah Thomas. None of them had to speak up. None of them had to get involved. But they did, because they understood that silence is permission. That when you watch someone being diminished and say nothing, you're teaching the abuser it's okay to continue. So speak up. Film it. Document it. Stand as a witness, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Fourth real change is slow, but it's possible. 2 years after Flight 447 Airlines are different. Not perfect, but different. Better. That didn't happen because people tweeted about it. It happened because David didn't let it go. Because thousands of people, passengers, crew members, activists, kept pushing. Change requires patience and persistence. Fifth redemption requires real work. Even Victoria, the person who caused all this, is trying to become someone better. She's not getting applause. She shouldn't. But she's putting in work, not for David's forgiveness, for her own humanity. And that's between her and her conscience. Here's what I want you to take from this story. Your worth is inherent, not conditional, not negotiable. You don't have to be a CEO to matter. You don't have to own planes to deserve respect. You just have to be human. And if someone tries to convince you otherwise, if they tell you to shrink, to move, to disappear, don't. Stand in your space. Occupy your seat. Exist fully, not aggressively, not violently, just unapologetically. Because the world doesn't change when we wait for permission. It changes when we stop asking for it. David didn't ask Victoria if he belonged. He just belonged. And that's all any of us need to do. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you reconsider how you see the world, do 3 things. 1, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to reach more people. 2, share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear it. 3, drop 3 words in the comments. I belong here. Not for me. For you. As a reminder. As a commitment. As truth. Because you do belong. Wherever you are. Whatever space you occupy. You belong. And anyone who says otherwise, they're wrong. Your dignity is not optional. Defend it.